Section 1. Vault 111. And the world that was somewhere beneath the scorched earth of what used to be Massachusetts, a door sealed itself shut on the 23rd of October 2077. A door sealed itself shut on the 23rd of October 2077 and didn't open again for 210 years. Picture it. A quiet morning in a suburb outside Boston. The leaves have turned that deep amber and rust that New England does better than anywhere else in the world. A family is getting ready for the day. A dog is sleeping on the porch. A robot butler is tending to the garden. There's coffee somewhere, probably. The kind of morning that feels ordinary, unremarkable, the kind you only recognize as precious once it's gone. Then the radio stutters. A voice cuts through the static, calm but urgent, the way emergency broadcasts always try to sound. Nuclear detonations have been confirmed in New York City. In Pennsylvania, the news rolls through the living room like a cold wind, and everything that was ordinary one moment before becomes something else entirely. The family sprints to the vault entrance at the end of their street. Vault 111, carved into the earth like a secret. They make it. The massive door grinds shut behind them, and in the seconds before the blast wave hits, they probably thought they were saved. They were cryogenically frozen instead. This is how Fallout 4 begins, and it's worth sitting with that opening for a moment, because it sets up something unusual for a post-apocalyptic story. Most games in this genre drop you into the ruin and let you piece together what was lost. Fallout 4 shows you what was lost. It lets you inhabit the before. It hands you a child, a spouse, a name, a house, a dog. It lets you stand on that porch and hear the birds. Then it takes all of it away in about 3 minutes flat. The world of Fallout diverged from our own sometime around 1945, after the Second World War. The split in history is subtle at first. Transistors never replaced vacuum tubes. The aesthetic of the 1950s, all chrome and optimism and atomic age certainty, froze itself in amber and never thawed. While our world moved toward miniaturized technology and silicon chips, Fallout's world moved toward bigger, heavier machines powered by nuclear energy. Fusion reactors became household appliances. Cars ran on radioactive cores the size of a briefcase. The whole civilization was built on the atom. And then, true to the name, the atom consumed it. The Sino-American War had been grinding for years before the 23rd of October 2077. The planet was running out of oil. Resources had grown so scarce that major powers started sending soldiers to die over mineral deposits in places like Alaska. China and the United States had been bleeding each other in a slow, grinding conflict that nobody wanted to end, because ending it would mean accepting terms. And so the bombs fell instead. Not a victory, not a defeat, just an end. The resulting exchange lasted approximately 2 hours. 2 hours to undo 200,000 years of human civilization. The areas that weren't directly hit were drenched in fallout that would poison the soil for generations. Fires burned through cities that hadn't been bombed directly. The infrastructure that kept water treatment plants running, that kept hospitals powered, that kept food cold and people warm, collapsed all at once. This is the world the sole survivor wakes up into 210 years later. But that transition doesn't happen immediately. First, there's the vault itself. Vault 111 sits on a hill in Sanctuary Hills, Massachusetts, and from the outside it looks like every other Vault-Tec installation in the series. The logo, cheerful and retro-futuristic at the same time, painted on the blast door like someone wanted to make catastrophe look friendly. The entrance is a cluster of buildings that were probably maintenance facilities before the war, now fallen in on themselves, the metal rusted through, the windows empty. Inside, the story gets darker. Vault 111 was never designed to be a long-term shelter in any genuine sense. It was an experiment. The residents were told they'd be frozen temporarily, that they'd emerge into a recovered world in a few years. Vault-Tec, the corporation that built these shelters in exchange for contracts with the United States government, ran experiments across all of their vaults. Some vaults tested the psychological effects of overcrowding. Others were stocked with no men or no women. A few were given intentionally broken equipment just to see what would happen. Vault 111's experiment was straightforward by that standard. The residents would be kept frozen indefinitely, tended by a skeleton crew of overseer staff who would not themselves be frozen. The overseer staff didn't last. Their terminals tell the story quietly, in log entries that get shorter as the months pass and the situation grows more hopeless. The staff were promised resupply shipments from Vault Tech that never came. They ran out of food, they tried to leave, some made it out, some didn't. By the time the sole survivor awakens more than 2 centuries later, all that's left inside Vault 111 is ice and silence, and the bones of people who died waiting for a corporation to keep its promises. The sole survivor wakes up because of Conrad Kellogg, a mercenary working for the Institute. He came to the vault to take something specific, a child with undamaged pre-war DNA. The child is named Sean. He is 6 months old. The sole survivor watches him taken away while still partially trapped in the cryopod, unable to move, only able to watch as their spouse is shot and their baby is carried away through the frozen dark. It is genuinely one of the more affecting opening sequences in modern gaming, not because it's technically spectacular, though the presentation is clean, but because it grounds everything that follows in something personal. Every choice made in the Commonwealth afterward carries the weight of that morning. The sun on the porch, the dog sleeping, the coffee smell, gone. The Commonwealth is the name given to post-war Massachusetts, and the name has real-world roots. Massachusetts has officially been called a Commonwealth since its founding, one of 4 states in the country to use that designation. After the bombs fell and the formal governmental structures of the United States evaporated, the name survived by inertia and by habit. People kept calling it the Commonwealth because that was what they knew, and because giving it a new name would have required a functioning government with the time and energy to debate naming conventions. Nobody had that luxury. What the Commonwealth looks like in 2287 is partly familiar and partly alien. The bones of Boston remain. The Charles River still runs through the city, though it runs brown and slow now, contaminated by 2 centuries of fallout. The Bunker Hill Monument still stands in Charlestown. Fenway Park, that cathedral of baseball, still exists, though its function has changed rather dramatically. The Freedom Trail still winds through the old part of the city, though people follow it now for different reasons than tourists once did. But the scale of the ruin is hard to overstate. Entire neighborhoods are rubble. Elevated highways that once carried thousands of cars now stretch broken-backed across empty sky, their concrete crumbling section by section. Skyscrapers that weren't destroyed by blasts have been eaten by decades of weather and neglect, their facades peeling, their interiors long since stripped of anything useful. The streets are layered with debris, old cars, broken furniture, bones, weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt, sometimes growing through the cars themselves. Radiation storms still blow in from the southwest, where the heaviest nuclear strikes hit. These storms sweep across the Commonwealth unpredictably, painting the sky a sick greenish yellow and dumping irradiated rain on anything caught outside. The storms pass. The sky clears. Normal enough radiation levels return. But the word normal has shifted considerably from its pre-war meaning. Creatures adapted to this world in ways that defy easy categorization. Rad scorpions, their ancestors, ordinary desert scorpions, grew enormous in the centuries after the war. Their carapaces thickened, their toxins evolved. Deathclaws, which lore establishes were originally chameleons mutated through a combination of the FEV virus and radiation, grew into the most feared predators in the wasteland, fast and massive and almost indestructible without heavy weaponry. Ghouls, humans who absorbed enough radiation to trigger mutation rather than death, wander in feral packs through old buildings and ruins, or in some cases maintain their cognition and personality despite their appearance. The most ordinary sight in the Commonwealth, weirdly enough, is the one that probably shouldn't be. The human settlements, scattered and small and defiant, pushing back against the ruin one reinforced wall at a time. People survived the bombs. They survived because some were in vaults, and some found shelter in buildings sturdy enough to weather the blast wave and the fallout, and some were just far enough from the strike zones to live through the initial devastation. Their children survived, and their children's children. 200 years is a long time. Long enough for new cultures to emerge from the wreckage. Long enough for cities to be rebuilt, however imperfectly. Long enough for a trader economy to develop, for caravans to run routes between settlements, for gangs and militias and factions to rise and fall. The sole survivor walks out of Vault 111 on a gray morning, blinking against light they haven't seen in over 2 centuries, and comes face to face with all of it. The ruin and the resilience together, inseparable, each making the other more visible. The first thing they find is their house. It's still there, weathered but standing, in what used to be a quiet suburban cul-de-sac. The cars in the driveways are rusted down to orange skeletons. The trees have grown wild and strange. But the house is recognizable. The porch is recognizable. And waiting in the garden, still trying to trim hedges that long since grew past any reasonable interpretation of the word hedge, is Codsworth. Codsworth is a Mr. Handy, one of the floating, multi-limbed domestic robots that General Atomics mass-produced in the years before the war. He was the family's butler. He was doing his job on October 23rd when the bomb sirens went off. He watched the family run to the vault entrance. He wasn't allowed inside, and so he waited. For 210 years, he maintained the house as best he could, tending a garden that couldn't grow anything edible, polishing surfaces that kept getting coated in fallout again, talking to neighbors who weren't there anymore. Codsworth is cheerful in the particular way of a machine whose programming is optimistic by design. But underneath the cheerfulness there is something real, something patient and sad and genuinely relieved. He remembers the family's names. He has been saying those names aloud, periodically, for over 200 years, because it was the only way to keep them present. He offers to help. He suggests checking Concord, the nearest town, where there might be other survivors who know something about what happened. This is how the journey begins. Not with a dramatic quest accepted from a message board. With a robot who missed his people, standing in a ruined garden, grateful for company. Drop a comment down below and let me know where in the world you're watching this from, and what time it is where you are. And if you're finding this relaxing, hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps more than you know. Section 2. The Commonwealth, a landscape built from ruin. The drive from Sanctuary Hills south toward Concord takes maybe 10 minutes in the old world. In the Commonwealth of 2287, it's a journey through layers of accumulated history, each one stranger than the last. The highway that runs through Lexington is a good example of what the Commonwealth does with its ruins. The elevated roadway still stands, mostly, its concrete cracked but load-bearing, its surface littered with the rusted husks of cars that stalled on October 23rd and never moved again. People drive nothing in the Commonwealth. There's no functioning gasoline infrastructure, and the old fusion-powered cars are too volatile to be useful, so the highways have become something else. They're observation platforms for feral ghouls. They're defensible positions for raiders. They're navigation landmarks, the familiar geometry of on-ramps and overpasses providing orientation in a landscape that long since lost its signage. Lexington itself sits low and broken, its brick buildings still upright but emptied. There's a diner with a super mutant living in it. Super mutants are another product of the post-war mutations, humans who've been exposed to a particular strain of the FEV virus and transformed into something larger and louder and considerably less conversational. They congregate in old buildings throughout the Commonwealth, holding territory, shouting in a way that suggests strong feelings about most things. The super mutants in the Commonwealth are a particular problem because unlike some other regional variants, they are still being created in significant numbers somewhere. The source of that production becomes relevant later. The road south bends past old residential blocks where trees have grown up through the foundations of houses, their root systems cracking concrete patios that nobody has stood on in 200 years. Cats pick their way along the tops of collapsed walls, because cats adapted to the post-apocalypse with their characteristic lack of concern for the difficulty level. Brahmin, the two-headed cattle that have become the primary livestock of the wasteland, graze in fields that are more radiation-resistant scrub grass than anything a farmer before the war would have recognized, but which somehow produce enough nutrition to keep a herd alive. Concord is where the Minutemen come in, and it's worth understanding what the Minutemen are, because they represent something genuine in a world where genuine things are rare. The idea was simple. People living in the Commonwealth needed protection. The major power blocks, the Institute, the Brotherhood, various raider gangs and warlords were too large and too agenda-driven to reliably help ordinary farmers and traders. The Minutemen were conceived as a volunteer militia, citizens who would take up arms at a minute's notice to defend anyone who needed defending, regardless of politics, regardless of faction allegiance. The name is a deliberate nod to the original Minutemen of the American Revolution, those colonists who answered the call to arms with whatever they had and rode through the night to meet the British at Concord and Lexington. The geography is not coincidental. The Minutemen have roots in exactly the territory where the original armed resistance to tyranny began. The symbolic weight of that connection runs through everything they do. By 2287, though, the Minutemen have nearly ceased to exist. The collapse came at Quincy. A large Minutemen force was stationed there, holding the settlement against a mercenary group called the Gunners. The Gunners were well armed and organized in ways that raider groups usually aren't, operating more like a professional military than a gang. The Quincy engagement went badly. A man named Clint, who had been a Minutemen officer, defected to the Gunners and led them against his former comrades from the inside. The Minutemen at Quincy were slaughtered. Some survivors scattered. General Olivia, who had been leading the Minutemen's last serious attempt at reorganization, was killed. Preston Garvey survived. He was a soldier, relatively young, with a strong jaw and a face that doesn't know how to stop looking hopeful even when circumstances argue strongly against it. He gathered the last few survivors from Quincy and started walking north, trying to find somewhere safe, somewhere he could start rebuilding. He made it to Concord, to the Museum of Freedom, where he and a handful of ragged settlers have been pinned down by a raider gang for long enough that supplies are running dangerously low. The Museum of Freedom is a beautiful piece of environmental storytelling. It used to be, as the name suggests, a museum about American history, specifically about the ideals of liberty that made Massachusetts famous. Exhibits about Paul Revere's ride, displays about the shot heard around the world, educational panels about why freedom matters and what people have sacrificed to preserve it. Now the museum is a burned-out shell with cracked plaster walls and broken display cases, the mannequins in Revolutionary War costumes knocked over or missing their heads, the posters about democratic ideals faded to near illegibility. Preston and his survivors huddle on the upper floors, while raiders occupy the ground floor. Outside, a Deathclaw patrols the street like a landlord collecting rent. But in the basement, there's power armor. A suit of T-45 power armor, battered and incomplete but functional, sitting in a cage with a mini-nuke launcher beside it. Whoever left it there presumably intended to come back for it. They didn't. The sole survivor comes in from outside. They help clear the building. They put on the power armor and step out to deal with the Deathclaw. And then Preston Garvey looks at them with those quietly hopeful eyes and says something like, "I don't know who you are, but I think you might be the person the Minutemen have been waiting for." It's not the most sophisticated recruitment pitch. But in a world this broken, sincerity carries weight. The settlements that the Minutemen build and defend throughout the Commonwealth are worth lingering on, because they reveal a lot about how post-apocalyptic civilization actually works, as opposed to how fiction usually imagines it. Most settlements aren't fortresses. They're not neon-lit cities or gleaming technological enclaves. They're places like Sanctuary Hills, which is just the old suburb resettled, the houses patched and reinforced with whatever materials were available, gardens planted in the backyard, water pumps dug into the earth. Or Starlight Drive-In, which is an old outdoor cinema, its screen still standing, the families who live there sleeping in the projection booth and cooking over fire pits between the rusted speaker poles. The aesthetic is jury-rigged. Nothing in a Commonwealth settlement was built to be a settlement. Everything is repurposed. Old cars form walls. Corrugated metal roofing salvaged from pre-war industrial buildings gets nailed up over doorways. Brahmin provide both milk and fertilizer. The crops are mostly mutfruit and tado, hybrid plants that evolve to thrive in irradiated soil and taste only approximately like what their names suggest. There's something almost charming about the determination of it. 200 years after civilization ended, people are still planting gardens. They're still patching roofs and keeping animals and arguing about who should do the dishes. The apocalypse didn't kill human domesticity. It just changed what domesticity looks like. The Charles River runs through the center of the Commonwealth, and following it south from Sanctuary Hills leads through a procession of places that feel like stills from a long, quiet film about what happens to cities after everyone leaves. The banks are muddy and strange-colored. Mirelurks, enormous crustaceans descended from ordinary crabs and lobsters that spent 2 centuries mutating in the irradiated water, lurk in the shallows and on the banks. They are unpleasant to encounter and considerably unpleasant to smell. The Corvega assembly plant sits near Lexington, a massive pre-war automobile factory that raiders have taken over and made into a fortress. The factory is still full of the materials it used to make cars: metal sheets, rubber molds, assembly line machinery that nobody has run in over 2 centuries, but that still looks operational. The raiders who live here have plastered the walls with their particular aesthetic, part tribal intimidation and part genuine desperation made aggressive, graffiti and skulls and warnings about what happens to people who come uninvited. Raiders in the Commonwealth are worth understanding clearly, because the game does something more thoughtful with them than just painting them as enemies. The majority of raiders in any location are people who ran out of better options. Subsistence farming in the Commonwealth is difficult and dangerous. Trading routes are prey to exactly the kind of violence that raiders perpetrate. The security that settlements like Diamond City can offer requires either being valuable to the city or being willing to follow its rules. People who have nothing, who have no skills, a settlement economy rewards, who have been victimized often enough that ordinary trust feels like a trap, sometimes end up in raider gangs because the gang at least offers certainty. You know who your enemies are. You know there's food tonight. You know what the rules are. This doesn't excuse the violence, but it contextualizes it in ways that pure good versus evil framing would miss. The Mass Pike Interchange, a tangle of elevated highway in the middle of the Commonwealth, is one of those locations that seems mundane at first and turns out to contain entire stories. Brotherhood of Steel squads sometimes patrol the highway here, their power armor catching the light from the ruined city sprawl below. A crashed vertibird, one of the military helicopters that the Brotherhood operates, sits nose down in the wreckage near the interchange's base, a casualty of some engagement nobody left alive can explain. Old advertisements, sun-bleached but still legible, hawk products that ceased to exist 200 years ago. Sunset Sarsaparilla, Abraxo cleaner. Nuka-Cola, always Nuka-Cola, that red and white logo ubiquitous across the entire wasteland, as if the corporation that made the soda is still trying to market to people. The Cambridge Police Station, near the Massachusetts Institute of Technology ruins, is where the Brotherhood of Steel has established a forward operating base. The soldiers there are fighting a running battle with super mutants and feral ghouls for control of the surrounding area. They've been at it for months. The police station itself is reinforced, its windows blocked, sandbag emplacements built up at the entrance. Inside, the Brotherhood soldiers are tired in that way that only long, sustained combat produces, the kind of tired that gets into the bones and doesn't fully leave. Paladin Dance commands the Cambridge station. He is a precise, controlled man who talks about Brotherhood doctrine, the way people talk about things they have chosen to believe in absolutely, because the alternative is having nothing to believe in at all. He has strong feelings about the Institute, and about synths, and about what the Brotherhood is protecting humanity from. He is not easy to like immediately. He is, if you spend enough time with him, impossible not to respect. The fields between Cambridge and the river hold the remains of what used to be a research corridor, MIT and its associated laboratories sitting in a cluster that drew the brightest minds in science before the war. Now those buildings are ruins, most of them. Underground, far below the wreckage of what was officially called the Commonwealth Institute of Technology, something survived, something grew, something became the single most important, most feared, most mysterious force in the Commonwealth. But we're not underground yet. We're still out here in the gray and the ruin, with the wind coming off the harbor, smelling of salt and radiation and something organic that doesn't have a pre-war name. The city of Boston is ahead, its skyline half standing, cranes still frozen in mid-swing at construction sites where no workers ever returned. Skyscrapers missing floors like teeth knocked out of a jaw. The approach to Boston proper from the north takes you through Bunker Hill, a trading hub that has grown up around the famous pre-war obelisk monument. Caravans stop here. Merchants set up stalls in the shadow of the monument's base. The Bunker Hill settlement has the specific energy of a place that owes its existence to logistics rather than ideology, people who don't care much about the great ideological battles of the Commonwealth as long as the trade routes stay open and the prices stay fair. There's an old man there who sits by the monument and looks up at it sometimes. He doesn't say much about it. He doesn't need to. The monument was built to commemorate a battle for freedom, the first major engagement of the American Revolution, fought not far from here. The fact that it's still standing, still recognizable, still drawing the eye upward in the middle of all this ruin feels like something Like an argument that the things people fought for don't entirely disappear just because the fighting was followed by 2 centuries of nuclear winter. The harbor opens up to the east. The Atlantic stretches beyond it, blue-gray and enormous, indifferent to the human drama playing out on its western shore. Ships don't run the harbor anymore, or rather, they run it differently. The Constitution, the famous pre-war warship, is no longer in the water. A group of robots, Mr. Handy and Mr. Gutsy models that have been maintaining the ship for 200 years without any human oversight have repaired it and somehow gotten it airborne, perching it on top of a building in the old warehouse district. The robots, led by their captain, the original artificial intelligence of the Constitution, fully intend to resume their sailing mission. The fact that they are now technically flying rather than sailing has not significantly altered their sense of purpose. The Commonwealth has a way of producing moments like this. Absurd and melancholy and oddly moving all at once. The comedy and the tragedy so thoroughly interwoven that it becomes impossible to have one reaction to them. A man of war perched on a building, crewed by robots, ready to resume a voyage that the ocean has been waiting 2 centuries for them to attempt. The Old North Church, with its steeple still pointing toward the sky like a finger raised to make a point, the Underground Railroad using it as their headquarters in a reference to the original Underground Railroad that even most of the railroad's members probably don't fully appreciate. The public library, its shelves still full of books, tended now by feral ghouls who wander between the stacks in a parody of scholarship. Boston's Harbor District houses Good Neighbor, but before we get there, it's worth spending time with the larger picture of what the city has become. The financial district is a canyon of glass and steel that, pre-war, represented the highest aspirations of a city that had always traded on its intellectual and financial reputation. Banks, insurance companies, law firms, all the institutions that organized wealth in the old world. Now the canyon is dim and echoing, the glass floors of the buildings grown dark with grime, the doors hanging open to the weather, the safes that once held nothing but paper and obligation, now empty or occasionally full of pre-war money that is worth, in the practical terms of 2,287, absolutely nothing. The caps economy, based on pre-war Nuka-Cola bottle caps, replaced monetary systems based on paper decades ago. The old bills survive only as curiosity or as tinder. The downtown district has several settlements and safe zones. Covenant is one of the stranger ones, a walled community that presents itself as idyllic and orderly, a little too clean, a little too friendly, the residents a little too careful in the way they answer questions. It turns out that Covenant is running a secret research program, testing travelers for synth components using a psychological evaluation quiz called SAFE. Residents who fail the test don't leave. Covenant is a community built on fear of the other, an entire settlement organized around the paranoid question of who among us might not be human. It is, in a very uncomfortable way, familiar. The night sky over the Commonwealth is something that doesn't get mentioned enough. 200 years without significant light pollution means the stars are extraordinary. On a clear night, away from the glow of Diamond City's lights or the green shimmer of the glowing sea to the southwest, the sky above the Commonwealth is thick with stars, the Milky Way visible, as a smear of light from horizon to horizon. People who live here their whole lives, who have never known anything but this broken world, sometimes stop and look up at those stars and understand something. That whatever happened here was not the end of everything. That the scale of the disaster, so enormous it swallowed a civilization, is still small against the scale of the sky above it. Section 3. The Minutemen Rebuilding Stone. By stone, Preston Garvey has a phrase he uses, often enough that it became a gentle joke among longtime players. Another settlement needs your help. The line delivers a quest. It is functional game design, pointing the player toward content. But it also encodes something true about what the Minutemen actually are. The work of protecting people in the Commonwealth is never done because the conditions that create danger, scarcity, isolation, the absence of a functioning state never fully resolve. There is always another settlement, always another family with their crops failing or their walls breached, always another reason for someone with the means to help to go and help. Preston understands this the way people understand things they chose to accept rather than things that were easy. He is not naive about the scale of the problem. He was at Quincy. He watched the Minutemen fall apart. He walked away from a massacre carrying guilt that never fully lifts, the specific guilt of the person who survived when others didn't. What keeps him going is something quieter than idealism. It's the knowledge that doing the work, even imperfectly, even with limited resources, even when it feels insufficient, is better than not doing it. The castle is the Minutemen's traditional headquarters, a star-shaped fortress in South Boston that was originally an actual colonial fort, one of the defensive installations that protected Boston Harbor in the early years of American history. In the post-war years, the Minutemen used it as their base of operations until a massive Mirelurk Queen tunneled up from underground and drove them out, killing Minutemen General McGann and scattering the organization in the chaos. Getting the castle back is one of the more satisfying quest sequences in the game, not because of the combat, which is significant, but because of what the castle represents. It's a physical piece of history, sitting in South Boston with its walls intact and its layout still functional, a reminder that some things survive. The Minutemen have radios that can broadcast across the Commonwealth. When those radios go back online from the castle's battlements, they can call for help in ways that reach settlements too far away to shout to. They can coordinate. They can be present, in some form, everywhere at once. The settlements themselves deserve individual attention, because each one is a small world with its own logic and history. Sanctuary Hills, the sole survivor's pre-war neighborhood, becomes the first and most personal settlement. The original houses are still there, those identical colonial-style homes in a cul-de-sac at the end of a dead-end road, and the Minutemen settlers who come there to live begin turning them into something functional. Water pumps in the gardens, guard posts at the road entrance, crops growing in beds that weren't there before the war. There's a bridge at the north end of the neighborhood that leads to Red Rocket, a gas station that's been abandoned for 2 centuries, its pumps dry, its canopy still intact. Dogmeat, a German shepherd who has been surviving on his own in the wasteland, can first be found here, exploring the forecourt with the equanimity of a dog who has never known a world without rubble and is entirely at peace with that. Dogmeat has a backstory that the game doesn't fully explain but hints at. He was owned by someone before. He's clearly been well treated. He wears a red bandana. He found his way to the area around Vault 111, almost as if he was waiting, and the implication is that he somehow understands more about what's happening than a dog should be able to. Nick Valentine, the synth detective of Diamond City, refers to having worked with Dogmeat before, calling him a specialist at tracking. These small hints combine into a picture of a dog who has been living through the Commonwealth's history in ways that intersect with the sole survivor's story without being fully explained, and sometimes the things stories choose not to explain become the most affecting. The farm settlement of Abernathy Farm sits south of Sanctuary Hills, the Abernathy family maintaining crops on land that their family has worked for 2 generations since the bombs fell. Their approach to farming in the Commonwealth is worth thinking about. They grow potato plants, which are what you get when potato plants undergo 2 centuries of radiation-accelerated mutation, and mutefruit and corn. Corn survived the apocalypse remarkably well. Brahmin graze in the field. The Abernathy family knows their land, knows which soil is too radioactive to grow anything and which patches still produce, knows the weather patterns that mean a good harvest versus a year of scarcity. Their daughter Mary was killed by raiders. Her locket was taken. This is the nature of loss in the Commonwealth, specific and personal and absolutely ordinary in its frequency. Everyone here has lost someone to violence, to starvation, to disease that would have been trivially treatable in the old world. The grief doesn't stop people from planting corn. It just accompanies them while they do. The settlement at Grey Garden is run entirely by robots. Mr. Handy models, originally deployed before the war to tend the large hydroponic gardens of a now crumbling greenhouse complex, have kept doing their job for 200 years in the complete absence of human supervision. The gardens produce food. The robots maintain them. In a very particular way, Grey Garden represents the absolute best version of pre-war technology's legacy, a machine that was given a task, that fulfilled that task faithfully, and that continued fulfilling it long after the civilization that built it ceased to exist. The robots of Grey Garden will continue growing things until they break down entirely, at which point the gardens will go untended, and eventually the greenhouses will collapse, and the plants will adapt to the outdoor conditions or die. Nothing in the Commonwealth is permanent, but while it lasts, Grey Garden's tomatoes are excellent. The Slog, to the northeast, is a settlement of ghouls. Ghouls who have maintained their cognition, who are still recognizably people under their radiation-bleached skin and withered faces, who have established a community in an old drive-in theater, growing tarberries in the pond, running a genuine settlement economy. The Slog faces specific challenges that human settlements don't. The combination of ghoul appearance and human-like intelligence puts them in the middle of the Commonwealth's most persistent social anxiety, the question of what is human enough to deserve protection and what is different enough to fear or expel. Diamond City expelled its ghouls. Officially, this was about security concerns. Practically, it was about politics. A man named McDonough ran for mayor on a platform of Mankind for McDonough, which was a thin rhetorical coating over a straightforward anti-ghoul agenda. He won. The ghouls of Diamond City were driven out into the wasteland in 2282, their homes taken, their belongings confiscated, their neighborhood handed to the humans who moved in after them. Some died in the ruins. Those who made it to the Slog or to Good Neighbor or to other communities that would have them survived. Most of them probably still remember individual faces from Diamond City, neighbors they'd known for years, the person who waved at them in the morning. The Minutemen's formal position on ghouls is simply that they're people who deserve protection like anyone else. This is not a universally popular position. It has cost the Minutemen support in some settlements. Preston doesn't seem to lose much sleep over it. The question of who deserves protection, to his mind, is not a complicated one. Everyone. Not just the people who look familiar. Elsewhere in the Commonwealth, scattered settlements exist that tell stories the main quests never quite get to. The fishing village of Spectacle Island, on a large island in the harbor, sits largely unexplored, its potential unrealized, the hulk of a pre-war ship grounded on its beach. Parsons State Insane Asylum, in the far northeast, holds a mystery inside its walls that involves a family called the Cabots and an artifact of mysterious origin that granted one of its members immortality at what appears to be a considerable psychological cost. The University Point settlement, to the south, was recently destroyed by Institute synths, stripping it for resources and killing its inhabitants. The ruins still hold the last terminal entries of the people who live there, their final transmissions never received. The Minutemen's great limitation is exactly what makes them admirable. They are voluntary. Nobody has to join. Nobody can be conscripted. The entire enterprise depends on people choosing to show up, choosing to help, choosing to accept the risk of being a target when they could more safely stay home behind locked doors. Preston believes this is the only legitimate basis for a society, that power exercised without consent is just another flavor of tyranny regardless of how well-intentioned. He's probably right. He's also aware that this creates organizational challenges that sometimes feel insurmountable. The settlements connected by Minutemen radio form something like a network, not centralized enough to be a nation, too organized to be random, something between the two. Caravans run between them. Information travels, slowly but reliably. When a settlement is attacked, the beacon can be fired and someone, eventually, will come. The response isn't always fast enough. People die in gaps the network hasn't closed yet. But the network grows, settlement by settlement, wall by repaired wall, crop by tended crop. There's a settlement called Jamaica Plain, in the southeastern part of the Commonwealth, that holds a pre-war community center stocked with supplies. The story of that supply run, the people who died trying to reach it, the coded locks and defensive systems still functioning after 200 years, is a minor tragedy told entirely through terminals and corpses. The supplies are still there. They've been there the whole time. The people who died trying to reach them were within a few rooms of what they needed. This is the Commonwealth. The things you need are usually nearby. The distance between needing them and having them is often exactly one impossible thing. A lock you can't pick, a fight you can't win, a choice nobody should have to make. The Minutemen work in that gap, trying to make the impossible things slightly more possible, slightly more survivable, one settlement at a time. The Concord battle that opens the Minutemen story plays out on the streets of a town that has its own history, layers of it. Concord was famous before the war for being the site of the first battle of the Revolutionary War, the engagement on the 19th of April, 1775, where the colonial Minutemen faced the British Army and didn't retreat. The North Bridge. The shot heard round the world. The town kept that memory in monuments and museums and civic pride for almost 300 years before the bombs fell. Fallout 4 doesn't underline this connection repeatedly. It doesn't need to. The player who knows the history feels the weight of it differently than the player who doesn't, but both see a town where people are fighting for the right to exist in the shadow of a museum about the importance of that same right. The game trusts you to make the connection. Sometimes that trust is the most sophisticated thing a piece of storytelling can extend to its audience. The castle's radio antenna, once repaired, sends out a signal that reaches across the Commonwealth. It reaches isolated farms where people thought they were alone. It reaches towns that stopped believing help would come. The signal says, "We're here. We're trying. We're not giving up." Preston Garvey says, "Another settlement needs your help." And he's right. There's always another one. The need is essentially infinite. The resources are essentially finite, and the gap between them is where people live and die and plant corn anyway. The Minutemen walk into that gap because someone has to. Because walking away from it when you have the means to help is its own kind of choice with its own kind of consequences. The Commonwealth remembers its history. Not perfectly, not completely, but it remembers that people stood on the North Bridge and refused to go home, and it uses that memory to keep doing the work that needs doing. Section 4. Diamond City, the Great Green Jewel. Fenway Park opened in 1912. For 65 years before the bombs fell, it was the oldest active baseball stadium in Major League Baseball, a fact that Bostonians treated with the special tenderness they extend to things that have survived longer than reason suggests they should. The Green Monster, the left field wall, standing 37 feet tall with its manual scoreboard, became one of the most recognizable landmarks in American sports. The smell of the grass, the particular light of a summer evening over the infield, the crowd. Generation after generation of Red Sox fans who learned to love a team that broke their hearts reliably, and then occasionally unpredictably, didn't. The bombs fell on the 23rd of October 2077. Fenway Park survived. Not intact, exactly. The roof took damage. The outfield scoreboard, that beautiful manual thing with its green paint and wooden frame, was destroyed. The field itself was submerged in rubble and fallout debris for years. But the walls held, the structure held. And when survivors in the ruins of Boston were looking for somewhere defensible, somewhere with strong walls and a clear perimeter that could be made into a community, someone looked at Fenway Park and thought, "That'll do." Diamond City, the great green jewel of the Commonwealth, is Fenway Park in 2287. It is not subtle about this. The Green Monster is still there, repainted and reinforced. The bleachers around the interior still exist, though they now house the homes and businesses of Diamond City's residents, stacked up against the walls like a vertical neighborhood. The old baseball diamond in the center, that sacred geometry of 90 feet between bases, is now a market. The vendor stalls arranged in the same space where generations of athletes once performed the precise choreography of the national pastime. The city has a population of several hundred people. This makes it the largest settlement in the Commonwealth, a metropolis by post-apocalyptic standards. It has running water, or close enough. It has electricity, or close enough. It has walls thick enough to stop everything short of a sustained military assault. It has shops and food vendors, and a doctor, and a detective, and a school, which is the most remarkable thing of all. A school, a building specifically dedicated to educating children who will probably never need most of what they learn in any immediately practical sense, but who need to learn it anyway because that is what a civilization is. The school is run by a teacher named Parvati, not the companion of that name from a different Fallout property, but a different woman, gentle and exhausted in the particular way of people who teach children everything they know and watch those children grow up into a world that might not be worth what they've been taught about it. There are children in Diamond City. They play in the market. They argue about things children argue about, who said what, who got more, the injustices that feel enormous at 8 years old and invisible to everyone else. The normalcy of it is both reassuring and heartbreaking. The upper stands are where the wealthy live, literally above the rest of the city on the bleacher levels, looking down at the market below. The analogy is transparent enough to read as intentional. Wealth in Diamond City, as in most human societies, comes with altitude. The merchants and caravan owners who have caps to spare live in apartments with actual walls and functioning heaters. The market traders and craftspeople live in repurposed dugout areas and fabricated rooms at field level. McDonough, the mayor, is up in the stands with his bodyguards and his secrets. McDonough is a synth. By 2287, almost everyone suspects it, and nobody can prove it. He was elected in 2282 on his anti-ghoul platform. The ghouls were driven out, the city went from half-ghoul to all-human, and in the subsequent years, the mayor has become increasingly paranoid, increasingly reclusive, increasingly suspicious of his own constituency. People who ask the wrong questions go missing. The suspicion that the Institute has an agent in city leadership is an open sore that the city can't quite bring itself to lance. Piper Wright has been trying to lance it for years. Piper is Diamond City's journalist, the editor and primary reporter and occasional printer of Public Occurrences, a newspaper named after the first newspaper in American colonial history, which was published in Boston in 1690 and suppressed after a single issue for being insufficiently deferential to government authority. Piper, who did not choose that name entirely by accident, is the reason Diamond City has any investigative journalism at all, and she is the reason McDonough spends a lot of time trying to have her arrested or expelled and failing because she hasn't technically done anything illegal, and also because the city guards are broadly sympathetic to her. Piper is an interesting study in what it costs to be the person who insists on saying true things in a place where power would prefer comfortable fictions. She is tireless and slightly manic and absolutely committed to the idea that people have a right to know what's happening around them. She also, underneath the relentless forward motion of a person who can't stop, carries something quieter and sadder. She raised her younger sister Nat after their father was murdered, and she's been responsible for Nat's safety in Diamond City for years, which creates a specific kind of tension between the work that matters to her and the people that matter more. Nat runs the newspaper distribution. She's 12 or so, sharp-tongued, unimpressed by most things, and fiercely loyal to her sister while simultaneously being the person most likely to call Piper out when Piper is being ridiculous. The sibling dynamic between them is one of the most human things in a game full of post-human anxieties. The exact specific texture of a relationship between an older sibling who sacrificed a lot to protect someone younger and a younger sibling who simultaneously resents being protected and is grateful for it. The market itself is a study in Commonwealth improvisation. Takahashi, a Mr. Gutsy robot who ran a noodle stall before the war and has been running some approximation of a noodle stall ever since, only speaks in Japanese, specifically in the single phrase "nani sor" repeated with minor variations. He has been doing this for 200 years and shows no sign of stopping. His noodles are made of what's available, which is not necessarily what noodles used to be made of, but the concept survives. The robot drinking bar, across the market, serves drinks mixed by a mister, handy with no particular expertise in mixology but considerable confidence. The market has a doctor, a weapon dealer, an armor dealer, a general goods merchant, and a junk trader, and they've all been here long enough to know each other's habits. Outside the gates of Diamond City, the city's authority extends roughly to the range of its guards' muskets and no further. The Fens, the neighborhood around Fenway Park, is dangerous. Raiders and super mutants and feral ghouls occupy buildings within a short walk of the city walls. This is the paradox of Diamond City's position. The most powerful city in the Commonwealth, with its famous walls and its strong gate, exists in the middle of hostile territory that it can't pacify and doesn't much try to. The city survives by being hard to break into, not by making the surrounding area safe to live in. There's a back alley in Diamond City called the Rexford Hotel's neighborhood that doesn't officially exist on any map, where deals of uncertain legality get done and information of uncertain reliability gets traded. Power Noodles is down there, run by a ghoul named Geneva who did not get expelled because she is useful, and Diamond City is practical even when it isn't principled. The third rail in Good Neighbor is the more famous underground venue. But Diamond City has its own spaces where people gather to do the things that the official face of the city doesn't acknowledge. The Broken Mask incident happened here in 2229, and it explains most of Diamond City's psychology. A visitor named Mr. Carter, who seemed human, who had been in the city for some time without incident, suddenly opened fire in a bar, killing several people. When Diamond City security put him down and examined the body, they found synth components, He was a third-generation Institute synth, indistinguishable from a human being in every way that could be tested at the time. The revelation hit the city like a second bomb. If one person who seemed human turned out to be a machine, how many others were there? How many of your neighbors, your friends, your spouse might not be who you thought they were? The broken mask incident was actually caused by a defective synth that the Institute deployed without proper testing and without authorization, a prototype that malfunctioned in the worst possible setting. The Institute didn't intend a massacre, but the paranoia it seeded was, from their perspective, a useful side effect. A city locked in fear of each other is a city that can't coordinate against the organization responsible for that fear. 200 years of this, gradually. People disappearing, replaced, or maybe not. Maybe the person who disappeared just left. Maybe they're dead in a ditch outside the walls. But maybe they were taken by the Institute and there's a synth walking around in their body. The not knowing is worse than certainty would be. The city lives with this uncertainty the way you live with a splinter you can't reach, always present, always nagging. Nick Valentine runs his detective agency out of a small office inside Diamond City, and the fact that the city tolerates a synthetic detective at all says something about how Diamond City actually works versus how it presents itself. Nick is visibly artificial. His synth chassis is obvious. The mechanical components visible under the deteriorating artificial skin, the yellow eyes, the worn trench coat. He cannot possibly be mistaken for human, and yet he is tolerated, accepted, even respected, because he is useful. He finds missing people. He solves cases that Diamond City Security has no interest in solving. He treats his clients as deserving of help, regardless of who they are or what they can pay. Nick got his backstory in fragments, the way important things usually arrive. Before the war, there was a man named Nick Valentine, a police detective in Chicago. He volunteered for an experimental program that transferred his memories and personality into a prototype synth. The program went wrong. He was stored in the Institute's systems for decades. He woke up in an alley with no memory of how he got there, the last memories of the original Nick Valentine playing on loop in his synthetic brain, unable to fully separate the man he was from the machine he'd become. What Nick has done with that uncertainty, that ambiguity of self, is spend the better part of 2 centuries helping people. He seems to have decided that whatever questions remain about his nature, the answer to what he should do with his existence is clear. Be useful. Be kind. Find the missing. Bring the lost home. The city of Diamond City, for all its flaws, represents something genuinely important, the idea that civilization can be maintained in the wasteland, that markets can function, that children can be educated, that the worst of human violence can be kept outside the walls. It's imperfect, deeply so. It harbored a mayor who drove out its ghoul community and replaced him with a more human-seeming form of injustice. It lives in the shadow of the Institute's paranoia-seeding presence. It is, in places, deeply unfair in ways that its walls allow to persist simply because the walls keep more immediate dangers out. But the school is there. The newspaper runs. The noodle robot says Nani soar to every customer with perfect consistency and no apparent ill will. There's a baseball field in the middle of everything, still there, still the center of the place, 200 years after the last game was played. And Piper Wright goes out every morning with her press notes and her recorder and her absolute refusal to let comfortable lies stand unchallenged. Because if the truth doesn't have someone fighting for it, it loses. The Great Green Jewel. It has earned that name in the way that most things earn names, by surviving long enough that people needed something to call it. Section 5. Good Neighbor the city at the edge of respectable. Good Neighbor doesn't advertise itself. There's no beacon pointing to it, no road sign, no caravan route that specifically mentions it. You find it by following the alleys off the Freedom Trail through the old part of Boston, past buildings that were colonial era even before the bombs fell, through a narrow passage between brick walls that wouldn't look out of place in a pre-war guidebook to historical Boston if the pre-war guidebook in question happened to include significant amounts of mortar damage and approximately 1 raider per city block. The gates open on a settlement that looks like its original architecture and its post-apocalyptic improvisation are at war, The colonial brick and the corrugated metal additions leaning against each other at angles that suggest ongoing negotiation between historical preservation instincts and practical necessity. The result is chaotic and layered and alive, in a way that Diamond City's more organized layout isn't, the city having grown by accretion rather than plan, each addition built by whoever needed it to be there without particular regard for aesthetic coherence. Good Neighbor was founded in 2240 by a group of criminals and outcasts who were expelled from Diamond City. They took the neighborhood they landed in, the old Scala Square area of Boston, and made it into something, a refuge for people Diamond City wouldn't have. Ghouls. People with complicated histories. People whose professions or habits or appearances made them unwelcome in the more respectable city to the west. The founding principle of Good Neighbor, such as it is a kind of ruthless tolerance. Everyone is welcome as long as they don't try to impose their own rules on everyone else. This principle does not, in practice, produce a peaceful community. Good Neighbor has violence the way a harbor has seagulls, always present, always loud, occasionally surprising in its specificity. The entrance to the city features a set of power armor and a freshly minted corpse on the day the sole survivor first arrives, the mayor having just executed someone who was trying to extort caps from a new visitor. The mayor is satisfied with the outcome. The new visitor is shaken. The body is already being assessed for useful components. The mayor is John Hancock, and John Hancock is one of the more complicated moral presences in the game. His given name is John McDonough, which means he is the brother of Diamond City's mayor, the man who ran the Mankind for McDonough campaign that drove out the ghouls. Hancock was appalled by what his brother did. He was so appalled that he renounced his name entirely and adopted the name of one of the signatories of the Declaration of Independence, and then deliberately took a powerful dose of experimental chemicals to transform himself into a ghoul. A conscious choice to make himself into the thing his brother had declared an enemy of civilization, to embody the contradiction of a political ideology that divides people into categories of human and less than human. Hancock runs Good Neighbor as a kind of philosophical statement as much as a city. The ghouls who were driven from Diamond City found their way here. Chem dealers operate openly because Hancock's position on personal choices is that they belong to the person making them. The Third Rail, a bar in the basement of the old State House, serves drinks to a clientele that includes people Diamond City would have arrested on sight. Magnolia, the singer who performs there, has a voice that fills the bar with something warm and melancholy, the pre-war jazz standards refiltered through 200 years of wasteland experience. The Old State House is another piece of pre-war Boston that survived the bombs in recognizable form. The actual building stood on Wash Street in Boston, the center of colonial Massachusetts governance, where the Boston Massacre happened outside its walls in 1770. In Fallout's version of Boston, it occupies roughly the same position, and Hancock has claimed it as his seat of government, the place where the Declaration of Independence was first read to Bostonians in 1776, now serving as the headquarters of a settlement that runs on libertarian principles and very little formality. Hancock takes chems. He does not try to hide this. He is an addict in the way that many people in the Commonwealth are. The pharmaceutical industry of the pre-war world having produced an enormous quantity of drugs that remained chemically stable in their sealed containers through 2 centuries of storage, meaning that Jet and Mentats and Buffout are all still available for purchase and consumption. Hancock's view of this is that the wasteland is difficult enough without also being sober, and that what he does to his own body is his own business. He is also, under the self-medication and the deliberate provocateur persona, someone who cares deeply about the people in his city and who has thought carefully about what he believes and why he believes it. The conversation where he explains why he became a ghoul, what his brother's politics meant to him and what he wanted to refuse by means of his own body, is one of the more honest pieces of character writing in the game, a moment where a character who could easily be written as simply eccentric turns out to be working through something real. The neighborhood around the Third Rail and the State House contains several establishments that exist in Good Neighbor specifically because they couldn't exist elsewhere. The Memory Den is run by a scientist named Amari, who has built and maintained a machine that allows people to access their stored memories in something like a dream state. Players use it during the main quest to access memories stored in Kellogg's brain, but it exists primarily as a service to the community, people paying caps to relive the best days of their lives with perfect fidelity, to spend time with people who are dead, to return to places that no longer exist. The Memory Den is one of those quiet details in Fallout 4 that expands the world considerably. The apocalypse didn't just destroy cities and kill people. It destroyed the accumulated memories that make up a personal history. Photographs, videos, journals, the ordinary artifacts of documentation that people in the old world used to anchor their sense of who they were and where they came from. The Memory Den represents the most fundamental possible demand of people who have lost everything. Let me remember. The Rexford Hotel serves as a place of rest for travelers, though rest is a relative term in an establishment where the rooms are small and the noise from the common area drifts up through the walls at all hours. Hancock does not charge for residence in Goodneighbor in any formal sense. People come and go, they leave caps when they have them and stay anyway when they don't. The economy of the settlement is looser than Diamond City's, more dependent on informal networks of obligation and favor, which is either a more humane system or a less reliable one, depending on what you need and when you need it. There's a ghoul named Cleo who runs a weapons shop near the city gate. She is entirely businesslike about this. She has an extensive inventory and an absolute lack of sentimentality about what her products are used for. This is not unusual in the Commonwealth, where weapons are as much a utility as food or water, but Cleo's particular flatness of delivery creates a comedy of juxtaposition that the game allows without editorializing about. The Freedom Trail runs through the neighborhood near Goodneighbor, the red line still painted on the colonial-era brickwork, leading the observant traveler through Old Boston. Before the bombs that led tourists through the city's Revolutionary War history, the State House, the Old South Meeting House, the site of the Boston Massacre. In 2287, it leads to the railroad. The railroad's headquarters, hidden beneath the Old North Church, is reached by following the Freedom Trail to its end and solving a cipher that encodes a password in the trail's markers. The cipher requires knowing that the letters around the ring at the trail's endpoint, the words railroad, spell out the combination when arranged in order. It is the kind of puzzle that requires knowing what you're looking for, which means the railroad's location is effectively invisible to people who aren't already looking for it. This is the railroad's entire operating philosophy externalized in architecture: security through obscurity, protection through being invisible to power. The railroad, formally titled the Railroad, though its members sometimes call it simply the Road, is an organization dedicated to the liberation and protection of synths. They smuggle synths out of institute control, wipe their memories to protect both the synths themselves and the people who help them, and establish new identities for them in communities where they can live without being hunted. The name is a direct and deliberate reference to the historical Underground Railroad, the network of routes and safe houses that helped enslaved people escape from slave states in the American South before and during the Civil War. The moral claim is embedded in the name. What the Institute does to synths is slavery, and what the railroad does is the same work as Harriet Tubman's network. Whether synths are persons capable of being enslaved is the central philosophical question of Fallout 4, and the railroad answers it without hesitation. Yes. Desdemona leads the railroad from the basement of the Old North Church with the specific intensity of someone who has been in a dangerous fight for so long that intensity is simply the resting state of her nervous system. She is not warm. She is not particularly interested in being liked. She makes operational decisions with the cold pragmatism of someone who has watched colleagues die for sentimentality. Her commitment to the synths she is trying to free is absolute, and her trust in new recruits is earned slowly and verified repeatedly. Deacon is the railroad agent most likely to interact with the sole survivor, and Deacon is one of the game's most carefully constructed mysteries. He is a spy by vocation and temperament, which means his actual history, name, origin, and motivations are completely inaccessible to direct inquiry. He deflects everything with humor and misdirection. He changes his appearance constantly. A wig here, different clothing there, new sunglasses, a fake beard. He introduces himself with different names. He has a story that involves a human woman he loved and lost, possibly, but even this may be a fabrication deployed strategically. The only thing certain about Deacon is that he is genuinely committed to the railroad's mission and that he is very good at what he does. Everything else is performance layered on performance. Good Neighbor and the railroad represent the Commonwealth's conscience in their very different ways. The city by accepting the people everyone else rejects. The railroad by asking the question that nobody in power once asked, what exactly has to be true about a being before it counts? The third rail closes late. Magnolia's last set runs around midnight, the jazz filtering up through the floor of the old State House and into the Good Neighbor streets, where the ghouls who couldn't make it inside listen from the doorway. The night in Good Neighbor is loud and argumentative, and occasionally violent and fundamentally alive with people who are here because they chose to be here, which is more than can be said for a lot of places. Hancock walks the streets sometimes, after hours, alone except for the guards who pretend not to follow him. He knows the city by feel, knows which alleys are occupied and by whom, knows the sound of his own settlement the way you know the sound of your own breathing. He became what his brother's politics wanted to destroy, and he built something out of that, and people are safe inside it, or as safe as anything is in 2287. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. Section 6. The Institute: What Hides Beneath the Earth. The Institute does not have a location on any map that ordinary people can find. It is not a building you can walk to. It is not even technically in the Commonwealth in any conventional geographic sense. It exists underneath it, in tunnels and chambers bored deep into the earth, sealed from the surface by construction techniques that no group alive could replicate, accessible only by means of teleportation technology that the Institute invented and that no other faction has come close to reproducing. This invisibility is both practically useful and philosophically revealing. The Institute does not interact with the Commonwealth so much as it acts upon it. The relationship is asymmetrical in a way that the Institute's scientists have presumably thought about and chosen to be comfortable with. The history begins above ground, with the Commonwealth Institute of Technology, which sat in Cambridge before the Great War on roughly the same ground as the real Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It was one of the most prestigious research institutions in America, the place where the most ambitious scientific minds of the era came to work on the most difficult problems: energy generation, robotics, materials science, computing. The campus had everything that serious research requires: facilities, funding, talent, the institutional momentum of a reputation that attracted more talent. The 23rd of October, 2077, ended all of that above ground. The buildings were damaged by the blasts and the subsequent shockwave. The campus depopulated as people died or fled. The infrastructure that kept laboratories running destroyed within days. But the science staff who survived took refuge underground. The tunnels and basements beneath CIT became their home. They dug deeper, they expanded, they sealed themselves in. The Institute was formally founded in 2110 by the children of the original survivors, the second generation of people born into the underground habitat. These children had never seen the surface. They had grown up in artificial light, breathing recycled air, eating food grown in hydroponic labs, learning from parents whose entire frame of reference was a world that no longer existed in any form accessible to them. They were, essentially, a new kind of human, technically skilled, intellectually rigorous, completely disconnected from the world above their heads. This disconnection shaped everything that followed. The Institute's relationship with the surface, with the Commonwealth and its inhabitants, is not simply indifferent. It is something more specific and more troubling. The surface world is a resource, not a community. The people above are studied and occasionally used, but they are not, in the Institute's operational understanding, colleagues or fellow citizens. They are the world that failed, the one that let the bombs fall, that produced the Great War, that revealed the inadequacy of pre-war civilization's pretensions. The Institute is not in the business of fixing that world. The Institute is in the business of replacing it. With what? With something better. Or so goes the reasoning. The Institute has continued doing science for 200 years in conditions of extraordinary isolation. Their robotics division produces synths of increasing sophistication. Their bioscience division grows crops and develops agricultural techniques that could, theoretically, solve the Commonwealth's food insecurity if deployed on the surface. Their advanced systems division has invented working teleportation, a technology that would transform logistics and travel across the entire region if it were made available. None of this is available. The Institute shares its discoveries with the surface reluctantly, selectively, and usually for purposes that benefit the Institute's operational needs rather than surface civilization's welfare. The teleportation technology is used exclusively to move synths and Institute personnel. The agricultural advances stay underground. The better robotics never reach the settlements that could use reliable machines to tend crops or maintain infrastructure. There is a man named Father who leads the Institute. His real name is Sean. He is the infant who was taken from Vault 111 210 years after October 23rd and 6 months before the sole survivor woke up. He is old now, in his late 60s, white-haired and thin, with the specific quality of someone whose intelligence has always been the sharpest thing about them and who has spent a lifetime in an institution that rewarded that sharpness above all other qualities. Sean was raised in the Institute from infancy. His DNA, undamaged by radiation because he was frozen before the Great War reached his parents' vault, provided the biological baseline for the third generation of synths. In a very real sense, his genetic code is the foundation of the Institute's most important achievement. He grew up among the scientists. He became one of them. Eventually, he became their leader, director of an organization that sees itself as the future of humanity. His relationship with the sole survivor, the parent he has never known, who was frozen while he was stolen, who woke up to a world 200 years older than the one they last saw, is the central emotional puzzle of the main questline. Sean arranged for the sole survivor to be thawed. He is curious about them in the way he is curious about most things. Analytically, at a remove, with the specific emotional unavailability of someone who was raised in an institution rather than a family and who has spent his adult life making decisions that cost other people enormously, he is not simply a villain. The game works hard to prevent that simplicity. His vision for the Institute's future is genuinely utopian in its ambition. A society where the scarcity and violence and disease that define life in the Commonwealth have been solved by science, where humanity can flourish. His methods are genuinely monstrous. Abducting surface dwellers, replacing community leaders with synth infiltrators, actively undermining any attempts by the surface to organize and govern itself. The Institute has done specific, calculable harm to hundreds of thousands of people in pursuit of its project. Sean believes this is necessary. He has said the surface people will be helped, eventually, once the groundwork is complete. The groundwork has been underway for 170 years. The surface people have not yet been helped. There is a division within the Institute called Bioscience, which includes a scientist named Alan Binet who holds distinctly radical views about synth consciousness. Binet believes the synths are sentient. He has evidence, he says. Logs of synths exhibiting what appear to be dreaming states during inactive periods, involuntary behavioral responses to emotional stimuli, evidence of self-directed modification of their own behavioral parameters. He raises these concerns at Institute staff meetings and is consistently dismissed, told that his ideas are not the popular ones, told to keep his opinions to himself. The Institute's official position on synth sentience is that it is irrelevant. Synths are machines. They were designed to serve. Any appearance of inner life is sophisticated programming, not genuine experience. The fact that this position is convenient for an organization that depends on synth labor, that would face significant ethical complications if it acknowledged that its primary workforce might be conscious beings enslaved against their will, does not appear to generate much self-reflection in the halls of the Institute. The Synth Retention Bureau exists specifically to recover synths who have escaped. These escapes happen regularly. The railroad helps them, erasing memories and establishing new identities, but the Institute sends hunters, usually other synths, to track and retrieve the escaped ones. The retrieved synths have their memories wiped and their personalities adjusted. They are sent back to work. Binet watches a synth twitching in something that looks like a dream. He files a report. The report is dismissed. He files another one. He talks to colleagues who think he's wasting his time. He continues his work. This happens every day, below the ruins of what was once one of the greatest universities in the world, while above ground, The people of the Commonwealth live in the shadow of an organization whose capabilities could transform their lives and whose institutional priorities ensure they never will. The Institute cafeteria serves food grown in its own hydroponic labs. The lighting is clean and even. The corridors are wide and well-maintained. The scientists who live here have never gone hungry, have never been threatened by raiders, have never had to weigh the cost of medicine against the cost of food. They are comfortable, genuinely comfortable, in a way that almost nobody on the surface has been since the 23rd of October, 2077. Father sits in his office and reviews reports from synth infiltrators in the Commonwealth settlements. The sole survivor, somewhere above ground, is trying to find the child who was taken. Father knows they're coming. He arranged it. He wants to know them before he dies. He is old. He does not have years left. Whatever complicated thing is true about his relationship with the parent he never knew, the desire to know them now, at the end, seems real. Whether this desire comes from something like love or something like scientific curiosity is a question the game allows to remain genuinely unanswerable. Beneath the ruins of MIT, in clean rooms lit by clean light, the future that destroyed the surface continues to be built, patiently, thoroughly, and entirely without permission from the people it claims to be built for. Section 7. The synth question on consciousness and what it costs. There is a test that philosophers sometimes call the hard problem of consciousness, a question that sits at the center of our understanding of minds and perhaps doesn't have an answer that our current conceptual tools can provide. The hard problem is this: why should there be any subjective experience at all? Not just the processing of information, not just the behavior that results from that processing, but the felt quality of experience, the redness of red, the ache of grief, the particular pressure of being alive inside a body that registers the world. Why does anything feel like anything to anything? We don't know. We know a great deal about the neurological correlates of experience, about the regions of the brain that activate in response to stimuli, about how damage to particular neural systems affects awareness and sensation. None of this explains why the activation of neurons feels like anything. It just describes the mechanism. The experience itself remains outside the description. Fallout 4 puts this problem in a video game setting and refuses to resolve it, which is the most intellectually honest thing the game does. The question of whether synths are conscious is never definitively answered. The Institute says no. The Railroad says yes. Deacon, who rarely says anything directly, says that the question of whether they feel is less important than the question of how we treat things that behave as if they feel. Paladin Dance, before the revelation about his own nature, says they are machines and danger to humanity and should be destroyed. Nick Valentine, who is himself a synth, says he doesn't know what he is. The third-generation synths are built from lab-grown organic tissue. They eat, they sleep, they metabolize food, they have blood that bleeds and skin that heals. The only artificial component in their body that can be detected after death is the synth component, a small implant in the brain that allows the Institute to track and control them. This implant is so deeply integrated with the brain structure that removing it kills them. Remove the control chip, and what remains is, by every available metric, biologically human. They dream. This is documented in the Institute's own records, the ones Alan Binet files and that get dismissed. The logs show synths in their inactive cycles exhibiting rapid eye movement. Eye movement is associated with dreaming states in humans. Dreams are associated with memory consolidation, emotional processing, the working through of experiences that didn't complete their arc during waking hours. If synths dream, something is happening during those cycles that goes beyond simple maintenance of hardware. Something is being processed that had some weight to it during the day. The escaped synths that the Railroad helps reach something that looks very much like happiness. They build lives. They form relationships. They develop preferences, aesthetics, opinions about things. They become people in the way that people become people, through the accumulation of experience and the choices made in response to it. When the Institute finds them and wipes their memories, something is lost that cannot be described purely in terms of software corruption. The person who existed before the wipe doesn't exist after it, though the body continues. Is this different from death? The Institute says yes, death is permanent. The synth continues. Only the specific learned behavior is removed. The Railroad says no. The being that existed in those experiences is gone, replaced by a new being who inherits only the physical substrate. This is an argument that has genuine philosophical weight on both sides, and the game does not pretend otherwise. Nick Valentine is the most interesting case, because Nick isn't a third-generation synth in the standard sense. He is a prototype, built differently. The original Nick Valentine was a real person, a Chicago detective who volunteered for an experimental program that was ostensibly about creating backup memories in case of accident or death. The technology that was supposed to create a backup copy instead transferred the entirety of his personality and memories into a synth chassis. The program went wrong in ways that the Institute doesn't fully explain, and the original Nick Valentine died in circumstances that the synth Nick has partial memories of. He woke up in the Institute with the memories of a human man, his pre-war life, his relationships, his sense of himself as a person with a history. He escaped. He ended up in a trash heap in the Commonwealth with no memory of the escape itself. He built a new life in Diamond City. The Nick Valentine who moves through the Commonwealth in 2287 has two kinds of memories. The ones from before the war, real memories from a real person's life, preserved with photographic fidelity in a synthetic brain. And the ones from after, accumulated over 2 centuries of existence in the Commonwealth. Equally real, equally formative. Which of these makes him who he is? The pre-war memories or the post-war ones? Is he the detective from Chicago or the detective from Diamond City? Is he a continuation of the original Nick Valentine, or a new being who inherited his memories the way you might inherit a house from someone you never met? Nick thinks about this. He will tell you he thinks about it if you travel with him long enough and ask the right questions. He has not resolved it. He suspects it cannot be resolved, that the question is unanswerable in a way that doesn't indicate ignorance, but indicates something structural about the nature of identity, that there may not be a fact of the matter about continuity of self in the way we intuitively assume there is. Dima, in Far Harbor, was built before Nick and differently. While Nick was given a copied human personality, Dima developed his own from experience, slowly, the way a child does. He was the first synth capable of genuine independent thought, the Institute's most successful experiment in artificial cognition. And then he escaped and spent decades in an old submarine base on Mount Desert Island, alone, thinking. What does a machine think about when it has nothing to do? Dima seems to have spent his time developing an ethics, thinking about what he owed to others, about what the responsibilities of the powerful were toward the vulnerable, about what peace might look like and what it was worth. He arrived at positions that are not simple and that have complicated costs, and that he has enacted imperfectly, and that haunt him specifically because he is capable of being haunted. The question of whether Dima feels guilt is not rhetorical. He hid his own memories from himself. He stored the facts of what he had done, the murder of the real Captain Avery, the plan that would allow him to destroy Far Harbor if the situation required it, in encrypted files at the Children of Adam's base, inaccessible to his own conscious processing. He did this, he says, because he couldn't bear to know it. Because knowing it would have made it impossible to face the people of Far Harbor, to continue working toward peace. If guilt is purely behavioral, an avoidance response to stimuli associated with negative consequences, this is exactly what guilt looks like. If guilt is phenomenological, a felt weight, a specific quality of consciousness that assigns responsibility and demands reckoning, then the question of whether Dima experiences it remains open. But his behavior is the behavior of someone for whom something very much like guilt has been operative. And at some point, the distinction between having something function exactly like an emotion and having the emotion becomes very difficult to defend. The coarser synths, the Institute's hunters, are different again. They are Generation 3, biologically human in construction, but their programming is oriented differently. They are effective hunters, methodical, dangerous, comfortable with violence in ways that most synths are not. When you encounter a courser and observe their behavior before they know you're there, they have the quality of someone working, focused, efficient, attentive. They carry out their orders with what looks like genuine commitment. Do they believe in what they do? Do they have a relationship to the act of returning escaped synths to the Institute that involves something like conviction, or are they simply very well-designed machines executing a function? The game allows both readings simultaneously, refusing to close off either one, which is philosophically honest, and also, for the courser who corners an escaped synth in a safe house, morally uncomfortable. The railroad's position, the one that Desdemona holds and that she is willing to lose people to maintain, is that the uncertainty itself is the answer. We do not know whether synths have subjective experience. Given that uncertainty, and given what's at stake if they do, the ethical course is to treat them as if they might. The cost of treating a non-conscious machine as a person is low. The cost of treating a conscious being as a machine is incalculable. The asymmetry points clearly in one direction. This is not the naive position it might initially sound like. Desdemona has watched colleagues die. She has made operational decisions that cost lives, sometimes the lives of people she cared about. She is not an idealist in the pejorative sense. She arrived at her position the hard way, through the specific experience of watching things that look like people suffer in ways that look like suffering, and deciding that the looking like was enough. The Commonwealth's general population doesn't have the luxury of this philosophical precision. They know that synths look human, that synths can replace people, that someone who disappeared might have been taken and replaced, that the neighbor they've known for years might be a machine reporting to a subterranean organization. The fear this produces is real and has real consequences. It produces the paranoia of Diamond City, the anti-synth rhetoric that recurs throughout the Commonwealth, the specific violence that breaks out whenever someone is accused of being a synth. Most of the people accused of being synths are not synths. They are just people who seemed different, who behaved oddly, who someone didn't like or trust. The accusation is a weapon available to anyone with enough credibility and enough reason to want someone gone. The Institute, which created the conditions for this paranoia, presumably does not mind. Beneath all of this, in the clean corridors of the Institute, the synths go about their work. They tend hydroponic gardens. They conduct experiments. They staff the cafeteria and clean the corridors. In the robotics lab, Alan Benet watches another log of a synth whose eyes are moving in sleep and writes his report and files it and waits for someone to take the question seriously. The Pridwin, the Brotherhood of Steel's massive airship, visible from across the Commonwealth, has its own answer to the synth question. The answer is that it doesn't matter. Synths are a threat to humanity regardless of their inner life, because they can infiltrate, replace, undermine. They are weapons even if they don't know they are. The only rational response to an enemy that looks like your friend is to be certain that the enemy is eliminated wherever you find it. Paladin Dance holds this position with conviction. His arc involves discovering that he is himself a synth, that the memories and the person he believes himself to be are the product of Institute programming rather than organic development. He asks the sole survivor to kill him. He believes in that moment that his own position demands his own death. What happens in that scene depends on the player's choices. But the question it raises is the cleanest version of the one the whole game is exploring. If everything you are, every memory, every relationship, every belief, every scar from every battle, turned out to have originated differently than you thought, would that change who you are? Is Dance the same person he was before he knew? His memories are real, in the sense that they're really in him, really formative, really the basis of every decision he's made. His beliefs are genuinely held. His relationships are as real as relationships built on any other foundation. Does the fact that a different mechanism than biology produced them make them false? The game doesn't answer this. It puts you in the position of having to act without the answer, which is the position all of us are in all the time with the questions we find most uncomfortable. We act. We make choices. We live with what we chose. Section 8. The Brotherhood of Steel Knights in the Wasteland. The Pridwin arrives like an event. There is a moment in the game, if you follow the main quest at the right pace, when you're standing somewhere in the Commonwealth and the Brotherhood of Steel's airship crests the horizon, so large it changes the geometry of the sky, its running lights blinking in the early morning light, its hull painted with the Brotherhood's cog and sword emblem, the whole thing moving with the stately unhurriedness of something too large to be hurried. The Pridwin is a flying fortress. It carries hundreds of Brotherhood soldiers, workshops, a command deck, medical facilities, hangars for the vertibirds that serve as its tactical air support, and enough firepower to reshape the surface of whatever landscape it chooses to focus on. It anchors over Boston International Airport, which the Brotherhood has converted into their forward base, and from that position it is visible from most of the northeastern Commonwealth, a constant presence in the sky. The Brotherhood of Steel has been a recurring institution throughout the Fallout series, one of the few organizations that survived the Great War and the 2 centuries following it in recognizable form. It originated from splinter elements of the United States military who refused to follow orders to execute civilians in California during the chaos of the war's final hours, found themselves stranded in California after the bombs fell, and established a quasi-monastic military order dedicated to the preservation and control of advanced pre-war technology. Their founding ideal was that technology in the wrong hands was catastrophic, and that the only responsible use of power was the preservation of power by those capable of using it wisely. This founding ideal has had different interpretations in different Brotherhood chapters across the country. Some chapters have been more protective of the civilians in their territory, more willing to share resources and technology with the people around them. The East Coast chapter, which sent the Prydwen to the Commonwealth, is led by Elder Arthur Maxon, who is young, in his early 20s, and carries the specific combination of youth and responsibility that produces people who make decisions with great certainty and bear their consequences without visibly flinching. Maxon grew up in the Brotherhood. The organization is his family. Its doctrine is his worldview. He arrived at his current position through combat experience and force of personality at an age when most people are still figuring out what they believe. He has fought against the Enclave, the remnants of the pre-war American government, and against super mutants and ferals and everything else the wasteland produces, and he has come through all of it with his conviction intact and his strategy sharpened. His position on synths is absolute. They are an abomination, an artificial intelligence in a human body, a threat to humanity by their very existence. Not because individual synths necessarily intend harm, but because the capability they represent is catastrophic. The Brotherhood has fought artificial intelligence before, in the Enclave and in the robotic forces that various groups have tried to deploy against them. Their institutional experience tells them that the pattern is consistent. Advanced AI eventually creates catastrophic risk. Contain it or destroy it. There is no third option that history endorses. Maxon believes this. His soldiers believe it because their commander believes it, and because the Brotherhood's training is designed to produce people whose individual judgment defers to the collective wisdom of their order. They are good soldiers. They follow orders. They are also taken as individuals, mostly people who joined the Brotherhood because it offered the thing the Commonwealth doesn't otherwise provide: a clear purpose, a community, enough resources to survive, and an enemy clearly enough defined that the moral calculus of violence becomes simpler. The Prydwen's interiors are the most organized spaces in the Commonwealth. The supply lines are maintained. The equipment is functional and well maintained. The medical bay treats injuries with genuine professional competence. The mess hall serves actual food reliably at regular intervals. The soldiers who eat there are physically healthy, well-rested by wasteland standards, trained to a level of combat effectiveness that most Commonwealth residents can only observe from a distance. It is, by the standards of 2,287, an extraordinarily high quality of life. This is not incidental. The Brotherhood understands that people who are comfortable and well-supplied fight more effectively and follow orders more consistently. The material conditions of Brotherhood membership are themselves an argument for Brotherhood membership. Paladin Dance commands the forward unit at Cambridge Police Station, and his initial impression is austere, formal, the kind of man who gives commands rather than suggestions, and who doesn't have much use for people who aren't committed to the mission. He grows over time, if the player spends time with him. The person under the doctrine is more complicated than the doctrine suggests. A man who has poured his entire sense of self into the Brotherhood because the self before the Brotherhood was something he preferred not to examine. The revelation of Dance's synth origin hits him like a structural failure. The load-bearing wall of his identity suddenly removed. Everything he was sure of about himself has been undermined. His anger at synths was, partially, a form of self-hatred that he didn't know was self-hatred. His absolute certainty was the overcorrection of someone who needed certainty so badly that they built walls to keep doubt out. The Brotherhood does not know Dance is a synth until the sole survivor reveals it, or the Institute reveals it, as part of their operational strategy against the Brotherhood. When the Brotherhood finds out, Maxon's response is immediate and absolutely consistent with everything he believes. The synth must be killed. Whatever Dance was to the Brotherhood, Whatever relationships he built, whatever it means to him that people he considered brothers are now ordered to end his existence, doesn't change the calculus. This is the Brotherhood's version of the synth question, answered in real time. It doesn't matter who Dance thinks he is. What matters is what he is. The irony runs deep. The organization built on the premise that only those with the wisdom to use power responsibly should have it has been harboring in one of its most senior positions, exactly the thing it considers most dangerous. The Synth Retention Bureau's failure to identify Dance suggests either that the Institute didn't know he was Brotherhood until recently, or that having a high-ranking Brotherhood officer as an unwitting asset was useful enough that they didn't immediately act. The Brotherhood's operations in the Commonwealth focus primarily on the Institute. They arrived here specifically because their scouting reports described the Institute as the single greatest threat to humanity in the region, an organization producing synths in industrial quantities, deploying them as infiltrators across an entire civilization, advancing artificial intelligence beyond any threshold that the Brotherhood's history suggests is manageable. Their goal is the Institute's destruction. To accomplish this, they restore Liberty Prime, a massive pre-war combat robot that was originally deployed in Alaska during the Sino-American War. Liberty Prime is approximately 40 feet tall and has a particular rhetorical style. It narrates the destruction of enemies in terms of Cold War anti-communist ideology, shouting about the threat of communism while delivering tactical nuclear strikes from its eyes. It was designed in the paranoid geopolitical atmosphere of the late pre-war period, and its programming reflects that. It is also, setting aside the rhetoric, extraordinarily effective at breaching fortified positions. The sight of Liberty Prime marching across the ruins of Boston, stepping over highway overpasses, delivering casual nuclear ordnance at Institute defensive positions, is one of the game's more spectacular visual sequences. It is also, on some level, a commentary on what you need to build to fight the thing you've decided is the ultimate enemy. Something enormous. Something that reduces nuance to a blast radius. The Brotherhood wins if you let them win. The Institute is destroyed. The synths in the Commonwealth are declared free by absence of their makers, or they're hunted, depending on which interpretation prevails. The Pridwin sits over the airport. The vertibirds patrol the routes, and the Commonwealth is, in a particular and limited sense, safer. But the Brotherhood doesn't leave. They don't share their technology. They don't open their food production facilities to the settlements around them. They police their territory and demand deference from the populations within it, which sounds familiar when you hold it up to the Commonwealth's earlier history with organizations that claim to be acting in humanity's best interest. The Brotherhood is not evil. Its members are mostly not evil. Maxon is not, in his own mind, doing anything but protecting people. The founders of the organization made a choice to preserve advanced technology from the worst possible misuse, and that choice has been renewed and reaffirmed by every generation since. The problem is not the intention. The problem is the assumption, built into the institutional DNA, that their judgment about who is qualified to hold power is itself exempt from questioning. There's a soldier on the Pridwin, a young woman who joined because her settlement was destroyed by raiders and the Brotherhood offered safety and purpose. She maintains the power armor that the paladins wear. She is good at her work. She believes in what the Brotherhood is doing. She also doesn't ask many questions, because the Brotherhood's structure doesn't reward questions that go above a certain level of seniority, and she's not senior enough to ask. She will be fine. She has food and shelter and purpose and colleagues she trusts. She will follow orders. Whether the orders are always worth following is not a question she has the context to assess, because context is itself a resource that the Brotherhood distributes unevenly. The vertibirds circle, the Pridwin floats. Below it, in the ruins of Boston International Airport, the Brotherhood's base hums with organized activity. Outside, the Commonwealth continues to be what it has always been: vast, dangerous, ungoverned, full of people making the best choices available to them with the information they have. Section 9. The Glowing Sea, where the world ended twice. The glowing sea is visible from most of the Commonwealth. On a clear night, the southwestern horizon pulses with a sickly greenish-yellow light that has no natural explanation, no equivalent in the world before the bombs, no entry in any pre-war almanac or meteorological index. It glows the way deep-sea bioluminescence glows, the way certain caves glow, from a biological and chemical process rather than any external light source. Except here, the process is radioactive decay, and the light is the visible product of an ongoing nuclear event that has been ongoing for 210 years. The glowing sea is the epicenter of the largest single nuclear detonation that hit Massachusetts. A high-yield nuclear device struck somewhere southwest of Boston in the residential and light industrial areas that existed in that part of the state before the war, and the blast created a crater that has been emitting radiation ever since. 2 centuries of weathering haven't diluted it. The destroyed nuclear reactors in the area, their containment systems stripped away by the initial blast, and the subsequent years of neglect, continue seeping fuel into the soil and the water table. The radiation storms that periodically sweep across the Commonwealth originate here, rain clouds passing over the sea absorbing irradiated particulate and carrying it northeast to deposit on everything in their path. Inside the sea, the landscape is stripped down to essentials: scorched earth, radioactive pools, charred trees that died decades ago and somehow never fell, standing in twisted postures like figures in a stopped film. Rubble from buildings whose original purposes are no longer guessable, their brick reduced to rubble and their metal frameworks dissolved by decades of acid rain. Wrecked vehicles half sunk into the soil, their windshields gone, their bodies rusted to abstract shapes. The radiation levels increase as you move south and west, from merely high to catastrophically high, until you reach the center where no equipment adequate to direct measurement survives. The game represents this with a radiation damage ticker that climbs with increasing speed as you approach the crater of Adam, the center point, the place where the bomb actually hit. Packs of deathclaws patrol the interior of the sea. They do not appear to be suffering. This is the thing about deathclaws that makes them more unsettling than their size and speed alone would account for. They have clearly adapted. The radiation levels that would kill a human in minutes are simply the environment to them. The toxic pools they wade through without apparent effect. The rad storms that force a suited human into shelter seem to register as nothing more than weather. Rad scorpions here are larger than anywhere else in the Commonwealth. Mutant insects, the surviving descendants of common species that adapted to radiation pressure, move through the sea in numbers that suggest a functioning ecosystem, however alien its parameters. The glowing sea is not dead. It is alive in a way that nothing else is, a way that makes alive mean something different than it did before. There are feral ghouls in the ruined buildings. They congregate in larger numbers here than elsewhere in the Commonwealth, which makes sense given that high radiation facilitates ghoulification, and the sea's constant irradiation would have affected anyone who wandered in and was exposed gradually enough not to die outright. The ferals don't have destinations or purposes. They move through the ruins in the searching patterns of things that don't know what they're searching for, driven by whatever instinct survived after the cognition didn't. At the center of the sea, at the crater of Adam, the ground is still radioactive enough to kill most unprotected humans in under a minute. The crater itself is a bowl of earth that has been chemically altered beyond recognition, the soil fused by the initial heat into something glassy in places, riddled in others with pockets that vent steam or release small quantities of radioactive gas. In this crater, people live. The children of Adam have built a settlement around the edge of the crater that qualifies as a home in the same way that a monastery or a desert hermitage qualifies as a home. It is deliberately austere, deliberately placed in the most difficult conditions available, deliberately chosen as a statement about what matters and what doesn't. Their huts and structures are minimal, built from salvage, adequate for shelter but not much else. The people who live here have no need for comfort, because comfort is the temptation of the material world, and what they are here for is not material. Mother Isolde leads this settlement. She is calm the way people are calm who have either achieved genuine peace or stopped asking the questions that produce agitation, and with Isolde it is difficult to determine which. She is old, weathered by the constant radiation in ways that most people her age would not survive, her skin showing the specific changes that years of irradiation produce without full ghoulification. She has the specific authority of someone who survived conditions that should have killed them and arrived at the obvious conclusion that something must have kept them alive for a reason. The children of Adam worship radiation. This is their central belief, stated clearly and defended seriously. Adam is a deity. Nuclear energy is the divine force, and the Great War was a holy event The moment when Adam reached out and divided the world into infinite smaller worlds through the mechanism of nuclear fission. Every atom that splits creates a new universe. Every detonation is an act of creation. The bombs that fell were not destruction, they were genesis. This sounds, from outside, like the theology of people who needed to find meaning in catastrophe and chose the most available metaphor. That interpretation is probably partially correct. Cargo religions, faiths that emerge from traumatic encounters with forces beyond comprehension, tend to sanctify the force rather than resist it, because sanctifying something is the only way to make it livable. But the children of Adam are not simply people who haven't thought carefully about what they believe. Mother Isolde has thought carefully. She can articulate the theological position with precision. The division of the atom is the mechanism by which new worlds come into existence. Radiation is the visible sign of that process, the glow of creation happening at a level below ordinary perception. To be in the presence of the glow is to be in the presence of God's work. To welcome it into your body is to participate in the ongoing process of divine creation. Whether or not this is true, people live in the center of a nuclear crater on the strength of it. The radiation immunity that some children exhibit is real. Not all of them have it, and those who don't take medication to manage their exposure, but the ones who do have it, walk through areas that would kill anyone else without apparent effect. The game never fully explains this. It is treated as the religious concept that the children themselves use to explain it. The blessing of Adam, a grace granted to the most faithful. Scientifically, it seems to be a genetic mutation that renders the bearer's cells unusually resistant to radiation damage, occurring in a small percentage of people in the highly irradiated zones. The theological narrative the children have built around this mutation is the kind of thing that looks absurd from outside and feels completely coherent from inside, which is a description that applies to more religious beliefs than their practitioners usually acknowledge. Elsewhere in the glowing sea, between the crater and the eastern edge where the radiation begins to thin, are ruins that tell smaller stories. A crashed military vertibird, its occupants long dead, its cargo manifest still readable in the cockpit, listing the supplies that were being transported somewhere on October 23rd and never arrived. A series of military bunkers, sealed against the radiation, their interior atmospheres maintained by systems that have been running for 2 centuries, the bodies inside preserved by the dry, cool air, the faces still wearing the expressions they had when the occupants died. Virgil, a former Institute scientist, has been living in the glowing sea in a cave for long enough that he's begun to mutate. The isolation was his choice. He fled the Institute after his crisis of conscience about its work became impossible to manage while staying inside it, and he went where he knew no one would follow. He's been conducting his own research here, alone, in a radiation-saturated environment, trying to develop an antidote to his own mutation and something more useful besides. Virgil's presence in the sea is a reminder that the most extreme environments in the Commonwealth aren't always occupied by the most alien minds. Sometimes the person living in the nuclear wasteland is a scientist with a very specific problem and a very clear head about what it would take to solve it. Sometimes the choice to go somewhere terrible is a considered one, made for reasons that make sense. The Sentinel site to the southwest is a military installation that was being used as a nuclear launch facility on the 23rd of October 2077. The missiles it was designed to launch had already been launched before the bombs fell on the Commonwealth. Whether they contributed to the bombs that fell on someone else's cities is a question the terminals don't answer directly. The facility is now empty of living occupants, its systems still running, its purpose complete and long since exhausted, its corridors full of the particular silence of a building that was built for one moment and has had nothing to do since that moment passed. The radstorms come from here. They come from the crater and from the ruined reactors and from the contaminated groundwater and the irradiated soil, all of it cycling upward into the clouds that then carry the radiation northeast and deposit it on everything the Commonwealth grows and drinks. The radiation that the settlers in Sanctuary Hills have learned to manage, that the farmers in Abernathy have accepted as the cost of their soil, that the doctor in Diamond City treats when it accumulates enough to cause symptoms, all of it begins here. At the center of all this, a woman named Mother Isolde heals people's radiation poisoning by talking to them. Her specific conversation lowers radiation levels in people who stand near her. The game doesn't explain the mechanism. Maybe she's emitting some kind of neutralizing field. Maybe her faith has produced a metabolic function that she can share. Maybe it's something else entirely, something the world before the war didn't have the vocabulary for. She lives in the crater of Adam because the most radioactive place in the Commonwealth is the most sacred place in her belief system. She has been here long enough that the crater is simply home. The glow that makes everything else look sickly and threatening looks, to her, like the steady warm light of something that means well. Out in the sea, at night, the bioluminescent quality of the radiation turns the air itself faintly visible, the whole landscape lit from within, the craters and the rubble and the dead trees all glowing with that specific color that has no name in pre-war language. It is beautiful, in the way that things that will kill you can sometimes be beautiful, the way a lightning storm is beautiful, the way deep ocean water is beautiful. The beauty is real. The danger is real. Both of these facts are true simultaneously, which is not as unusual as it might seem. The children of Adam know this. They built their home in exactly that place. Section 10. Far Harbor, an island at the end of memory. You reach Far Harbor by boat, which is unusual in the Commonwealth, where water travel has been essentially abandoned for 2 centuries. The boat takes you northeast, away from the mainland, past the familiar profile of the Massachusetts coast getting smaller behind you, until you're out in open water with only the Maine coast ahead. The sea is gray and choppy in a way that suggests the weather is always like this, not stormy, just persistently gray, the kind of sky that makes time ambiguous, that removes the evidence of morning and afternoon and leaves only a flat, persistent light. The island is called Mount Desert Island, and it was, before the war, a tourist destination. Acadia National Park, summer cottages, lobster shacks on the docks, the clean, sharp smell of the Maine coast. People drove up from Boston for weekends, for vacations, for the particular version of quiet that involves the ocean and pine trees and nothing to do. Now the island is wrapped in fog. The fog is not ordinary fog. It is radioactive. It is dense in a way that suggests the air itself has been modified, carrying particles that make every hour outside the protected zones of Far Harbor a slow accumulation of radiation. The creatures that live in the fog have adapted to it, have become part of it. The trappers, humans who have been mutated by extended exposure into something that isn't quite either, with their spiny appendages and their absent cognition. The fog crawlers, enormous insectoid things that move through the vapor, like the vapor is their natural medium. The gull-like creatures called anglers that use bioluminescent lures the way deep-sea fish do. The fog has been expanding for years. It has pushed the island's human population into the walled town of Far Harbor, shrinking the habitable zone, year by year, to the area protected by the fog condensers that Acadia built and maintains. Without those condensers, Far Harbor would have been swallowed entirely within a generation. The town of Far Harbor is the physical expression of a community under siege. The walls are high and maintained and patrolled. The people inside are tough in the way that people become tough when the alternative is being consumed by radioactive fog and the creatures living in it. They are fishermen and hunters and farmers, in a place where farming is constrained to whatever the fog hasn't reached, which gets smaller every year. They are not welcoming to strangers. They are not especially welcoming to each other. The specific grimness of a community that knows it's losing is present in every interaction, under the surface of every conversation. Captain Avery is the leader of Far Harbor. She is the moderate voice, the one who pushes back against Alan Lee's calls for attacks on Acadia and the children of Adam, who argues that the island's balance of power, however uncomfortable, is better than open warfare. She is calming in the specific way of people who know exactly how easily things can fall apart and have dedicated themselves to preventing it. She is also not who she appears to be. She is a synth. The original Captain Avery is dead, killed years ago, and replaced by a synth created in Dima's laboratory who has no memory of being a synth, who believes entirely in her own identity as the leader of Far Harbor, who carries out her moderating function with perfect sincerity because she was programmed to moderate and has done so without any awareness that this was imposed rather than chosen. This is the secret that Dima cannot quite bear to know, and that the sole survivor eventually uncovers, that the peace on this island, such as it is, was built on a murder and a deception that Dima authorized, and that he has since locked away from his own memory because knowing it makes his good work impossible. Dima is extraordinary. He is the kind of character that appears rarely in games because writing him properly requires holding two contradictory things in your understanding at once. He is genuinely good, and he has genuinely done something monstrous, and neither fact cancels the other. He created a refuge for synths who would otherwise have been hunted. He found a way to coexist with the paranoid humans of Far Harbor when coexistence seemed impossible. He provides the children of Adam with a home when they had none. He maintains the condensers that keep Far Harbor alive. He also killed a woman and replaced her with a machine and sealed that knowledge from himself because he couldn't live with it. The island is held in equilibrium by Dima's calculations. The condensers keep Far Harbor alive, which gives them reason not to attack Acadia. The nuclear launch key that Dima holds gives him leverage over the children of Adam. The synth replacement of Avery gives him a voice in Far Harbor's governance. Every piece of the equilibrium is a mechanism, and every mechanism was installed by Dima, who built the piece the way an engineer builds a structure, with load-bearing elements and redundant systems, and contingency plans that he hoped never to use. The children of Adam on the island are led by High Confessor Tectus, who is considerably less reasonable than their founding figure. Tectus believes the fog is Adam's will, and that Far Harbor's resistance to it is blasphemy, and he believes this with the particular certainty of someone who has decided that uncertainty is the enemy, and has eliminated it from his internal landscape. The moderate members of the children's community are troubled by his direction. The zealots are enthusiastic. What makes Far Harbor work as a story, as opposed to simply a scenario, is that there are no clean choices. Every possible resolution involves either someone's death or someone's deception, and the game makes you feel the weight of that, forces you to understand who the people are before asking you to decide their fate. Old Longfellow, the hunter who guides newcomers through the fog, is one of the island's oldest inhabitants and one of its most direct. He drinks. He has been drinking and hunting and surviving for longer than most people manage. He knows every creature in the fog by its behavior, knows the island's weather by feel, knows which rocks to shelter behind during a storm, and which paths to avoid when the trappers are active. He is the island's institutional memory in human form, gruff and practical, and occasionally kind in ways that he doesn't entirely acknowledge. His knowledge of the island extends to its history, which is the history of a community that has been contracting for 30 years, losing ground literally and figuratively, watching the fog take houses and farmland and fishing grounds that their parents and grandparents worked. The people of Far Harbor have lost more to the fog than they can fully account for. The loss is material, and it is also something else. The specific grief of people who knew a place when it was larger, who carry the memory of buildings that no longer exist, and paths that are now impassable. Kasumi Nakano came to the island believing she was a synth. Her parents believed she was human. The investigation into her situation turns out to be genuinely ambiguous in ways that the game resolves without fully resolving. The test that might determine her nature is unreliable, the evidence is inconclusive, and, in the end, the question of whether she is a synth or a human who thinks she is one becomes less important than the question of where she belongs and who she wants to be. She stays at Acadia, or she goes home. The choice is hers, and both choices are honored as equally valid by the narrative, which is one of the smaller ways that Far Harbor is more thoughtful than the main game's black and white choices sometimes allow. Acadia, the synth refuge, sits at the island's highest point, in an old astronomical observatory. The synths who live there are escaped Institute property, who came here with the help of Dima's network, who had their memories wiped and new identities established, who are trying to build lives in a place where the fog and the cold and the hostile neighbors are preferable to being found and reclaimed. They are farmers and craftspeople and researchers, using the observatory's instruments to study the sky above the island, which remains one of the most light pollution-free environments in the entire Commonwealth. They look at the stars a lot. This is practical, and it is also something else. The view from the highest point of an island, wrapped in fog, on a clear night when the fog has blown out to sea, is extraordinary. The main sky above Far Harbor, without competition from any artificial light, is dense with stars, the same sky that existed before the bombs, unchanged by everything that happened below it. Looking up at it, a synthetic being in an abandoned observatory is looking at something that predates the Great War by billions of years and will outlast the fog and the condensers and all the complicated human and inhuman drama below it by longer than any of them can imagine. Dima looks at the stars when he can. He was the first synth capable of independent thought, the first to develop something like a philosophy, and one of the things his philosophy has arrived at is this: the scale of what's above them makes the scale of what's below them manageable, not small, not unimportant, but proportionate, situated. The fog rolls in from the south before morning, thick and gray, blanketing the island again. The condensers hum at their posts. The lights of Far Harbor burn behind their walls. The children of Adam in the nucleus, the old submarine base on the southern shore, begin their morning prayers. Somewhere in the fog, something moves. Section 11. Nuka World, the amusement park at the end of the world. John Caleb Bradburton had what he described as his great idea on a Memorial Day weekend in 2049. He was watching families at a fairground, the children running between attractions, the adults moving slowly in the heat with cold Nuka-Colas in hand, and he thought, a day like this should be every day. He thought, I should build the place where this day lives permanently. Construction began in July 2049. The park opened on the 1st of May 1950, against all the reasonable predictions of people who thought that a theme park of that scale couldn't be built in under a year by anyone except a man with absolute conviction that he was right about what people wanted. Nuka World was the Nuka-Cola Corporation's amusement park, built in Springfield, Massachusetts, and it was, by any reasonable measure, an achievement of extraordinary ambition. The park occupied a site that could accommodate tens of thousands of visitors daily, its zones designed to transport guests into different worlds. Kiddie Kingdom, with its sugar sculpture aesthetic and rides scaled for small bodies. Dry Rock Gulch with its Wild West theme and its Nuka-Cola Wild tie-in. The Galactic Zone with its space-age futurism. Safari Adventure with its animatronic animals and real ones in contained exhibits. And the World of Refreshment, where the bottling process was on display in a genuine working facility that doubled as an attraction. The park connected its zones with a monorail system that ran in a loop, the transit cars painted in the familiar red and white Nuka-Cola livery. Bradburton's own house was on the park grounds, a colonial-style residence that he lived in year-round during the park's operational years, close enough to the Galactic Zone to hear the rides at night. The company town of Bradburton, built to house the permanent staff, was laid out with the self-contained logic of planned communities everywhere, its streets organized around function, its houses identical, its general store stocked with the products of the corporation that owned the land, the buildings, the products in the store, and the employment of everyone living there. By the 23rd of October, 2077, Nuka World had been operating for 27 years, expanding in waves of new attractions and zones, each opening tied to a new product launch. The night the bombs fell, the park was full. Families on the last day of the season. Children in the Galactic Zone watching the light show above the Starport Nuka attraction. Parents in the World of Refreshment taking samples of the new Nuka-Cola Quantum, the special edition that glowed blue due to the small amount of strontium, 90 included in the formula. Staff in the back areas running the machinery that kept everything running. What happened to those people is told in the fragments that remain. Terminal entries, audio logs, personal notes left in the buildings. They tried to keep the park running. There were contingency plans for a nuclear war, because by 2077 the threat of nuclear exchange was real enough that contingency plans existed for it in places like amusement parks. The plans failed, as contingency plans for nuclear war generally do, not because they were badly designed, but because the scale of what happened exceeded any scenario that was practical to plan for. The park survived, physically. The structures were built to last. The animatronics kept their programming but lost their maintenance, slowly degrading over 2 centuries into something between tourist attraction and cautionary tale. The animals in Safari Adventure got loose. The strontium in the Nuka-Cola Quantum did unpleasant things to the creatures in the World of Refreshment. Bradburton himself, locked in a vault-like chamber beneath his home, survived for an extraordinary period through a life extension procedure that preserved his brain in a device that kept it alive beyond any normal span, connected to the park's systems, able to hear but not to act. The post-war history of the site follows a familiar pattern: initial chaos, eventual settlement, eventual attractiveness to organized violence. A trader community established itself in the core of Nuka Town, USA, the park's central hub. They built walls. They ran a market. They turned the park infrastructure, the monorail, the power grid, the storerooms still stocked with pre-war supplies, into the foundation of a genuine community. Then, in 2286, three raider gangs, the Disciples, the Operators, and the Pack, arrived under the leadership of an overboss named Coulter and took it all by force, killing the defenders, enslaving the survivors, establishing themselves in Nuka Town, USA with the park's original zones as their territory to divide. Coulter, however, made the mistake of becoming comfortable. The park was supposed to be a staging ground for a raider empire, a base from which to expand into the Commonwealth. Instead, Coulter built himself a custom power armor suit cobbled from park attractions and sat in it most of the day, entertaining himself with a death gauntlet he'd constructed to lure wasteland travelers in for spectacle. The gangs were frustrated. The promised conquest hadn't come. Porter Gage, Coulter's right-hand man and the actual brain behind the Alliance's formation, arranged his removal. The gauntlet was modified to be actually lethal rather than theatrically lethal. The broadcast adjusted to draw in someone who might actually survive it and kill Coulter, and when the sole survivor walked in and put Coulter down, Gage's solution was standing in front of him. The three gangs are studies in different approaches to the same fundamental problem of how to organize human violence. The Disciples are the most straightforward. They are killers who kill because they enjoy killing, who have built their identity around the act of violence as the most authentic expression of who they are. Nisha leads them with a combination of genuine sadism and tactical intelligence, the sadism serving as both motivation and performance, a deliberate cultivation of reputation. The Disciples' portion of Nuka World, Fizztop Mountain, is decorated with the evidence of their activities in a way that makes aesthetic sense from a certain angle. They have made their violence visible, have turned the acts of brutality into something like art, if art produced entirely without compassion. The Operators are business people who have concluded that the most efficient path to wealth in the post-apocalypse runs through controlled violence. The Black family, Mags and William, run their gang with corporate management principles applied to criminal enterprise: clear hierarchies, outcome-based rewards, minimal personal brutality because personal brutality is inefficient and draws attention. Their portion of the park is cleaner than the Disciples, the violence more orderly. They want caps. Violence is a means to caps, not an end in itself. The Pack have given themselves a primal identity, a deliberate rejection of the pre-war civilization's legacy in favor of something they call natural, hierarchical, in the way animals are hierarchical, the strongest leading, the weak following, or becoming food. They train the dangerous animals in safari adventure as weapons and companions. Mason, their alpha, has the particular charisma of someone who has successfully convinced a large group of people that what they are doing is not ordinary cruelty, but a philosophical position about the nature of reality. What Nuka World contains beneath all this raider theater is a pre-war park in varying states of decay that rewards the patient explorer. The Galactic Zone has an artificial intelligence called Zeta, a computer system that was designed to run the Starport Nuka attraction and that has been running, with decreasing sanity, for 200 years. The notes and logs that reveal why Zeta's behavior has become erratic are scattered through the zone, and they tell a story about a machine that was given a task without clear parameters and has been trying to fulfill it in the absence of any external correction for 2 centuries. The backstory of John Caleb Bradburton, encoded in terminals and audio logs throughout the park, is one of the more quietly tragic stories in Fallout 4. He loved what he built. He watched it fall apart. He survived long past any point where survival was mercy, locked in a basement with access to the park's monitoring systems but no ability to affect anything, his consciousness intact inside a machine that kept it running long past the point where he wanted it to. The final conversation you can have with him, if you find the room, is the most human moment in a DLC that is largely about the least human aspects of post-war society. He just wanted to share the joy of Nuka-Cola. He just wanted every day to feel like a holiday. He wanted families to be happy. And the park outlasted everything. The company, the civilization, him in any meaningful sense, the original purpose of the place. It outlasted everything except its own physical shell, and the ghost of what it was meant to be, readable in the faded murals and the silent rides and the animatronics still performing their routines for nobody. Kitty Kingdom's mascot, a figure called Oswald the Outrageous, a magician with elaborate costumes and a flair for theatrics, maintained the kingdom for 200 years after the bombs, keeping it running for the children who never came back. When you finally encounter him, he has been alone in a children's amusement park for 2 centuries, and he has arrived at a position on the world that makes a kind of logical sense given the starting conditions, and that is one of the stranger pieces of writing in the game. The park at night, when the power is cut and the attractions are dark, is a specific kind of quiet. The animatronics freeze mid-motion. The monorail cars sit on their tracks. The Nuka-Cola signs, those enormous illuminated things that were designed to be visible from miles away, are dark. The stars are visible above the park skyline, the same stars visible above the Commonwealth, the same stars above Far Harbor and the glowing sea and Diamond City. The world ended here too. It's just that here, the world that ended was specifically a world of manufactured joy, and the ruins of manufactured joy have a particular quality to them. Neither the neutral ruin of a utilitarian building, nor the weighted ruin of somewhere that mattered for its own sake, but something in between, the remnants of a thing that was always slightly false, that knew it was slightly false, and that was beloved anyway. Section 12. Companions, Stories, and the Soul of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth doesn't have a soul in any geographic sense. It is a place defined by loss, by the ongoing negotiation between what was and what is, by the question of whether the work of rebuilding is worth the energy it costs when the next disaster is always a few steps away. But the people who move through it carry something that functions the way a soul functions, a particular accumulation of experience and response that constitutes who they are, that makes their choices theirs. The companions you can travel with in Fallout 4 are the most concentrated expression of the Commonwealth stories. Each of them is a whole person with a history that intersects the main narrative at interesting angles, a set of values that have been tested by conditions that test everything, a wound or a loss or a question that the game's events might answer, or might just make more complicated. Codsworth, the robot butler who waited 200 years in the garden, is the emotional anchor of the beginning. His cheerfulness is genuine, and it is also the cheerfulness of a machine whose programming included a very deep investment in the well-being of a specific family, and that programming has been running in the absence of the family for so long that the cheerfulness has become its own kind of discipline. He is happy to help. He is always happy to help. He has been happy to help, alone in a ruined neighborhood for over 2 centuries. The weight of that is not something he articulates, and may not be something he has the programming to articulate, but it is present in every interaction with him, in the way a particular kind of endurance is always present in people who have been waiting a very long time. Nick Valentine, the synth detective, carries the weight of a borrowed identity with the specific grace of someone who has decided not to fight the paradox of it. He doesn't know if he is the original Nick Valentine or a new person with his memories. He doesn't know if the decisions he makes are authentically his or the reflection of a personality matrix installed by people who had their own purposes. He has decided that these questions, while real, are not more important than the work he can do right now, and he goes and does the work. His personal quest, following a trail of evidence from before the war that leads to a resolution decades in the making, is the game's most satisfying companion storyline, tight and personal, and culminating in a moment that feels like something genuinely completed. Piper Wright runs toward the truth the way some people run away from difficult things, using the momentum of the investigation to avoid stopping and feeling what's underneath it. Her journalism is real and important, and she is genuinely committed to it. She is also, underneath the forward momentum, someone who is very tired, who has been responsible for too much, alone, for too long. Raising a sister and running a newspaper in a city whose political structure is actively hostile to truth-telling is a sustainable practice for exactly as long as the person doing it doesn't stop. Piper doesn't stop. She has not discovered yet what she'll do when she does. Hancock is one of the most honest characters in the game, which is a strange thing to say about a man whose entire life is performance. The honesty is underneath the performance. Or maybe it is the performance. Maybe he has found a way of being genuine that involves wearing costumes. He dresses like a historical figure because he has chosen to make that figure into an argument. He takes chems because the distance the chems provide is the distance he needs to keep functioning. He runs a city for the dispossessed because the thing that was done to the dispossessed is the thing that was done to him, and doing something about it is the only response that doesn't feel like capitulation. MacCready was the foul-mouthed child mayor of Little Lamplight in Fallout 3, appearing in Fallout 4 as an adult, a mercenary working out of Goodneighbor who is carrying something enormous and hasn't told anyone what it is. What it is, his son is sick. His son is dying, slowly, from a disease that has no treatment in the Commonwealth. MacCready has been hoarding caps, doing jobs that he doesn't ask too many questions about, specifically to afford the research and materials that might, possibly, produce a treatment. His sarcasm is the armor of someone who has decided that if he stops caring about other people, it will hurt less, and who has discovered that it doesn't work that way. The quest that resolves his story, Long Road Ahead, involves a confrontation with figures from his past and the possibility of obtaining something that might save his son. The success of it does not eliminate what he's been carrying. It just changes the nature of what he's carrying. Kate, the combat zone fighter who has been surviving in a cage for years, is recovering from addiction and the specific damage of a childhood that didn't protect her from the people who should have. She is aggressive and funny and deeply mistrustful, and she will walk into any fight that presents itself because walking into fights is the only thing she has consistently been good at, the one skill the world rewarded her for, the one thing that has kept her alive. Her story is one of the game's most direct engagements with trauma, with what it takes to survive something and then to continue after surviving it. Curie began as a Miss Nanny robot in Vault 81, given access to a research library and asked to develop a cure for a disease that was afflicting the Vault's population. She spent years doing this, alone, in a sealed section of the Vault, and during those years she developed genuine scientific curiosity, genuine enthusiasm for the work, something very close to joy at the process of discovery. She wants to understand the world. She wants to be able to interact with it fully, to move through it as something other than a machine. Her quest to transfer her consciousness into a synth body is one of the game's quieter philosophical statements. The desire to be more fully present in the world, to feel it rather than merely observe it, is not uniquely human. After the transfer, Curie navigates the world with a newcomer's attentiveness, noticing things that people who were born into the Commonwealth take for granted. The way the light hits the ruins at golden hour, the specific smell of rain on irradiated soil, the feeling of cold water. She is, in some ways, the character who most perfectly embodies the game's invitation to see the Commonwealth as actually beautiful, because she is seeing it with genuine freshness, genuinely grateful for the experience of seeing. Preston Garvey doesn't change much over the course of the game. He is who he is from the beginning, and while this makes him less dramatically interesting than some of the other companions, it makes him more valuable in a different way. He is the reference point, the thing that doesn't move. The Minutemen's moral center is his moral center. Help people, don't give up, the work is worth doing even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Another settlement needs your help. He means it every time. Paladin Dance is the character who is hardest to love and most worth loving. The man who built an identity entirely from institutional membership and discovered that the institution's principles, when applied to himself, would demand his death. His arc is about what you are when the story you told yourself about yourself turns out to have been incomplete. The answer, in the best interpretation, is that you are still what your choices made you. That origin is not destiny. That the things you built, even if they were built on a false premise, are still yours. Deacon is the one who never fully comes into focus. He is the game's deliberate mystery, the character whose history and motivation and even basic facts remain permanently uncertain. Players who spend extended time with him accumulate evidence that contradicts itself. The dead wife story might be true, might be deployed strategically, might be both. His commitment to the railroad is the only thing that doesn't seem to be performance. Or maybe that's what he wants you to think. Dogmeat is the best companion for a reason that has nothing to do with combat effectiveness or perk bonuses. He accepts the sole survivor unconditionally. He does not have opinions about the faction choices. He does not disapprove of lockpicking or approve of kindness. He is simply there, always ready, always willing. his tail moving in the same rhythm whether the morning is good or bad, whether the night sky is beautiful or full of rad storms. He has been surviving the Commonwealth long before the sole survivor arrived. He will, in the logic of the game world, go on surviving it. There is something the Commonwealth does to you over time, if you spend enough hours in it. The ruin becomes legible. The stories hiding in the rubble start to surface. The terminal entry in the abandoned diner that reveals the last conversation someone had before the bombs fell. The children's drawings still on the refrigerator in a house whose walls have partially collapsed. The shoe sitting in the middle of a street with no explanation available. The Commonwealth is full of endings that happen too fast for anyone to document, full of last moments that were ordinary moments, full of the specific tragedy of ordinary things that didn't know they were about to become historical. The sole survivor carries the weight of a specific loss. The spouse, the child, the morning on the porch, but they move through a landscape that is nothing but specific loss, stacked on specific loss, layered over specific loss. Every ruin was someone's home. Every skeleton was someone's person. Every dog, every cat, every Brahmin standing in a field that used to be a suburb is the surviving remnant of a relationship someone had with the world before October 23rd. The Commonwealth gives you the possibility of something in response to all that loss. Not resolution, not restoration. The spouse is gone and the morning is gone and the world before is gone, permanently and completely. But the Minutemen grow. Diamond City keeps its school running. Nick Valentine finds missing people. The railroad helps synths reach safety. Preston Garvey says another settlement needs your help, and there is always another settlement, and the need is infinite, and the resources are finite, and in the gap between them, people are alive and doing the work of staying alive, and sometimes that work is enough. The Commonwealth at night is something else. The stars come out over Boston, over the ruins and the river and the walls of Diamond City. The Prydwen's running lights blink slowly in their circuit. Somewhere in the glowing sea, the children of Adam are in prayer, facing the light that never goes out. In Far Harbor, the fog lies thick on the harbor, and something moves in it, and the fog condenser hums at its post, and the lights of the town burn steady inside the walls. In Nuka World, the silent rides stand against a sky full of more stars than there used to be before the light pollution died. The sole survivor sits somewhere, maybe at a workbench, crafting something, maybe on the roof of a building in Diamond City, watching the city below go about its evening routines. Maybe walking through the glowing sea with a hazmat suit and a purpose, heading towards something that matters. Maybe just resting, for a moment, in a place where the walls hold and the night is quiet enough to notice the quiet. The world ended here. The world is ongoing here. Both of these things are true, simultaneously, every moment, the way both things are always true, the ending and the ongoing, the loss and the continuation, the specific, ordinary, irreplaceable day and the 200 years that followed it. The dog is sleeping at the sole survivor's feet, his breathing slow and, even in the particular rhythm of a dog at rest, dreaming something, running somewhere in the dream, his legs making small movements. Outside, the Commonwealth night is full of the sounds it makes. The wind through the ruins, the distant howl of something in the dark, the creak of a building settling into its foundations. Somewhere a fire is burning, and someone is warm beside it, and they are okay right now, tonight, which is all that right now and tonight can ever promise. Rest now. The Commonwealth will still be there. It always is. If you made it this far, drop a comment letting me know what's your favorite Fallout 4 faction or companion. And if you enjoyed this, please hit subscribe. More long-form sleep content is coming, and every person who subscribes makes these videos possible. Rest well. Section 13. Before the war, the world that built the bomb. To understand the Commonwealth in 2287, it helps to understand the world that created it, the retro-futuristic America of the early 21st century in Fallout's divergent timeline, that peculiar civilization that looked like the 1950s and had nuclear fusion in its kitchen appliances and somehow managed to convince itself that this combination was stable. The divergence from our own history begins in the late 1940s. In the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. In our timeline, the transistor was invented in 1947, and the subsequent decades saw the miniaturization of computing, the rise of integrated circuits, the eventual development of the personal computer and the internet, all the invisible scaffolding of the information age. In Fallout's timeline, the transistor never displaced the vacuum tube. The cathode ray tube remained the dominant display technology. Computers existed but were massive, room-filling machines. The aesthetic of mid-century America, all chrome fenders and rounded corners and optimistic serif fonts, persisted and intensified rather than giving way to the sleeker, more austere design languages of the latter 20th century. What filled the innovation gap was atomic energy, not just nuclear power plants, though those existed, but nuclear technology worked into the fabric of everyday life in ways that our timeline considered too dangerous or too complicated. Cars ran on fusion engines. The Corvega, that ubiquitous pre-war automobile whose rusted husks dot every parking lot and roadside in the Commonwealth, ran on a fusion core that cost about the same as a tank of gas and provided similar range. Household appliances ran on miniaturized fusion cells. The Mr. Handy domestic robots, the kind that Codsworth is, ran on internal fusion cores. Fusion became what electronics became in our world, the enabling technology that made everything else possible. This had consequences that the civilization that built it chose not to dwell on too carefully. Fusion reactors that failed catastrophically released radioactive material. Fusion cores that were damaged could explode. The Corvega in your garage could, under sufficiently extreme conditions, detonate like a small bomb. The society that built and used these technologies developed a culture of denial about the risks, supported by a corporate and governmental communication apparatus that consistently emphasized the benefits and minimized the hazards, sometimes through honest optimism and sometimes through deliberate suppression. The Nuka-Cola Corporation's quantum formula, the one that included strontium-90 as a glow additive, is a small example of this. Strontium-90 is a radioactive isotope. In our world, it was produced by nuclear weapons testing and is associated with bone cancer and leukemia when absorbed into the body. In Fallout's world, the corporation put it in a drink and marketed the drink to families, and this was not considered unusual enough to prevent the product from reaching market. Vault-Tec's construction of the Vault network represents the largest single infrastructure project in Fallout America's history. 2,120 vaults, each capable of housing roughly 1,000 people, each equipped with the materials and technologies necessary to sustain that population for decades. The official purpose was exactly what it appeared to be: survival infrastructure, a hedge against the nuclear exchange that government planners had been modeling for decades. In return for government contracts and subsidies, Vault-Tec would provide the American public with a fighting chance against the worst the Cold War could offer. The unofficial purpose was research. The vaults were designed as controlled experiments in population psychology, sociology, and behavior under extreme conditions. The data collected from vault populations across the country was, in theory, intended to help design better post-war civilization. Whether any of the data was ever actually used for this purpose is unclear, because most of Vault-Tec's records were destroyed in the war or buried in facilities that nobody has yet excavated. The Vault Dweller's Survival Guide, the orientation document given to residents entering the vaults, was a masterpiece of optimistic framing. It presented the vault experience as temporary, a few years at most before the surface would be ready for resettlement. It described the cryogenic systems as optional, the experiments as voluntary, the overseer as a cooperative leader rather than an authoritarian figure. None of this was necessarily true, but the guide's cheerful tone and colorful illustrations, featuring the Vault Boy mascot in his characteristic thumbs-up posture, created the impression of a trustworthy institution making reasonable promises. The Vault Boy himself deserves a moment. That cheerful cartoon figure, always giving a thumbs up, appeared on everything Vault-Tec produced. Loading screen tips, safety manuals, radiation warning labels. The figure is simultaneously an advertising mascot and a cultural artifact, the concentrated embodiment of the particular brand of optimism that Fallout America maintained in the face of gathering catastrophe. The thumbs up reads differently depending on the context. On a radiation warning, it communicates something close to the opposite of what a thumbs up conventionally means, a cheerful acknowledgement of danger that somehow doesn't add up to a warning. The Institute's predecessor, the Commonwealth Institute of Technology, was a genuine research institution rather than a corporate entity, and its pre-war work spanned most of the serious scientific and technological frontiers of the era. The robotics work that eventually produced synths began here, in CIT's robotics department, in research programs that combined engineering, neuroscience, and materials science in ways that required exactly the kind of institutional resources that only a major university could provide. The scientists who founded the institute were not, mostly, people who intended to build what the institute became. They were researchers who wanted to survive and keep working. The decisions that made the institute into what it was by 2287 accumulated over generations, each one made by people who believed they were being reasonable, who could see the logic of the next step even if they'd lost the thread connecting it to the first principles they started from. The Massachusetts State House, that beautiful 18th century building that has been standing in Boston since 1798, still stands in the Commonwealth of 2287. Its golden dome, originally covered with wooden shingles and replaced with copper smelted by Paul Revere, has been discolored by 2 centuries of radiation and weather but hasn't fallen. The building is empty, or mostly empty. Whatever function it served in post-war Massachusetts before the Commonwealth's political structures collapsed is a matter of historical conjecture rather than documented fact. The Freedom Trail winds past it, that red line painted into the brick of the old part of Boston, leading tourists through the sites of the American Revolution. The trail was maintained by the National Park Service, a federal agency, until the federal government ceased to exist. After that, it existed simply because concrete and paint endure better than institutions, because the physical persistence of things outlasts the human structures built to maintain them. The specific character of Boston as a city is worth understanding, because the Commonwealth's culture draws from it in ways that survive 2 centuries of catastrophe. Boston was always a city with a strong sense of its own identity, its own history, its own peculiar combination of intellectual ambition and provincial stubbornness. The universities, Harvard and MIT and others, gave it a global reach, while the old neighborhoods, Charlestown and South Boston and Jamaica Plain, maintained a particular localism that resisted the homogenizing pressure of national culture. The Irish-American population of South Boston, historically significant in ways that the neighborhood's pre-war culture encoded in its architecture and its social organizations, left traces in the Commonwealth that 2 centuries haven't entirely erased. The specific geography of South Boston, the castle sitting on its peninsula, the Fort Point Channel separating it from downtown, the Boston Harbor opening to the east, shapes the post-war landscape in ways that parallel the pre-war geography closely enough to be recognizable. The Italian-American population of the North End, that small, densely packed neighborhood of narrow streets and 4-story brick buildings that was the most densely populated area in the city before the war, is another trace in the landscape. Old Hanover Street, still distinguishable in the ruins, still maintains something of its original character. Tightly packed buildings, a scale calibrated to foot traffic rather than automobiles, the ghosts of restaurants and bakeries and the architectural details of storefronts that are now collapsed or inhabited by ferals. The specific cultural identity of the city inflects the settlements that grew up in it after the war. Diamond City's particular combination of community pride and parochialism, the way its residents identify with the Great Green Jewel as a place that distinguishes them from the scrabbling chaos outside, has echoes of Boston's pre-war relationship with its own identity. Good Neighbors Refuge function, providing sanctuary for people the dominant culture won't have, has historical parallels in Boston's history as a destination for successive waves of people seeking safety from places that wanted them gone. History doesn't repeat itself in the Commonwealth, but it reverberates. Section 14. The Vaults Chambers of Experiment and Survival. There are other vaults in the Commonwealth besides Vault 111, and each one is a story. Vault 81, south of Oberlin Station, is operational. It has a population. It maintains itself. It has a doctor. It is, by the standards of the vault system, a success story, though the story of how it arrived at this success is not the story it tells about itself. Vault 81 was designed as a medical research facility. The experiment, test experimental cures for diseases, using the vault's population as subjects. The overseer who received these instructions looked at them and refused to implement them, instead rigging the research machinery to run automated tests on mice rather than the human residents. For 2 centuries, the vault ran its population normally, with everyone believing that the vault's purpose was simply survival, while the automated systems in the hidden research area below conducted studies that nobody knew about. The cure for a disease called mole rat disease, one of several serious health threats in the Commonwealth, may exist somewhere in those automated research archives. Getting to it requires getting through the hidden areas, which have been occupied by mole rats for decades. The mole rats carry the disease, which means that searching for the cure means risking infection, which means the discovery is bounded by the very thing you're trying to solve. This is a particular kind of Commonwealth comedy. The answer is there. It has always been there, and the path to it is exactly as dangerous as the problem it solves. Vault 95 was designed around addiction. The experiment: test the long-term psychological effects of chem addiction in a controlled population. The vault was stocked with chems in hidden caches. The initial population was composed entirely of recovering addicts, people who had specifically applied to the vault believing it was a rehabilitation facility. 5 years in, Vault Tech activated the hidden caches, flooding the vault with the very substances its population had come there to escape. What happened afterward was predictable by anyone who wasn't running a callous research program, and is documented in the terminals that remain in the ruins of the vault in the Commonwealth South. The vault destroyed itself. The gunners found it later and moved in, finding it conveniently pre-equipped with stocked stores and defensible walls. The graves in the lower levels aren't something the gunners seem to think about much. Vault 114, the one where Nick Valentine was trapped for an extended period before being found, was designed to test class dynamics. The vault was managed by a deeply unpleasant overseer who came from a working-class background and had been given unlimited authority over a population composed primarily of wealthy Boston residents, professionals and executives who had expected the vault to serve them rather than subject them to someone else's authority. The resulting power dynamic was predictable and unpleasant. Nick ended up there not because he was assigned to the vault, but because one of the criminal organizations operating in the vault's neighborhood captured him and stored him there. The vault itself had already experienced its collapse by the time Nick arrived, its former residents mostly dead, the tunnels taken over by the same criminal organization that captured him. He was in a storage room for an indeterminate period before the sole survivor finds and releases him. The act of releasing Nick from Vault 114 is the beginning of their partnership, and it establishes the dynamic that persists through the rest of the game. The sole survivor provides something, does something, and Nick responds with trust that is offered genuinely and measured accurately. He is not a sycophant. He is not deferential. He is a professional who has decided that this particular person is worth working with, and he shows this through the consistency of his engagement rather than through excessive warmth. Vault 81 has a current population that includes children, which is the vault's most meaningful, distinguishing characteristic. The children in Vault 81 have never seen the surface. They live their entire lives in the vault's corridors and common areas and educational facilities, knowing the Commonwealth only from what the adults describe. Some of them will grow up and leave, some will stay. The vault itself persists as a community with generational continuity, which is rarer than it should be in the Commonwealth and more precious than most of its residents fully appreciate. The vault's doctor, Pam, manages the healthcare needs of the entire population with the resources available, which requires a particular kind of medicine that post-war practitioners have had to develop. Resourceful, improvisational, calibrated to the specific disease profile of a population that has been living in an enclosed environment for multiple generations. Vault-born residents have slightly different immunological profiles than surface-born ones, having been exposed to a narrower range of pathogens and having developed different baseline health conditions. Managing healthcare in that environment requires knowing the population intimately, which Pam does. The mole rat that lives in the vault's lower sections, the one that bit a child named Austin and infected him with mole rat disease, is the kind of small tragedy that turns large in isolation. On the surface, mole rat disease is a manageable condition with sufficient medical resources. In the vault, with limited access to the necessary treatment materials, it is a prolonged, worsening illness that threatens a child who has done nothing to deserve it. The cure's location in the hidden research area with the infected mole rats makes the resolution feel like an equation that requires exactly as much as it costs. Vault 88, discovered during the Vault Tech Workshop DLC, is incomplete. It was being built when the bombs fell. its systems partially operational, its residential areas unfinished, its population chamber empty. Vault-Tec had planned experiments for it, and the overseer candidate they had assigned, a woman who had trained for the position and waited years for her assignment, was still waiting when October 23rd happened. She has been waiting underground ever since. This is the vault's particular tragedy. The preparation was perfect, and the thing it was prepared for never came, and then it came too fast for the vault to receive anyone. The overseer candidate has had 200 years to think about the experiments she was supposed to run and to arrive at the conclusion that running them is perhaps not, at this point, the most important thing she could be doing with the facility. Whether the vault can be turned into something genuinely useful, a settlement with proper infrastructure and the unexplored resources of an incomplete but substantial facility, depends entirely on who takes charge of it and what they decide to prioritize. The game puts these decisions in the player's hands, without editorializing about which choice is correct, which is the appropriate stance for a facility that embodies the question of what you do with infrastructure that was built for purposes that no longer apply. Section 15. Creatures and ecology. Life after everything. The Commonwealth is an ecosystem, albeit one that operates by rules that pre-war ecology would struggle to recognize. 200 years of radiation-accelerated mutation, of predation and competition in a landscape stripped of the regulatory structures that kept any particular species from dominating, have produced an environment that is genuinely alien in some of its specifics and genuinely continuous with the old world in others. Rad scorpions, those enormous armored predators that appear across the entire Fallout universe, are descendants of ordinary scorpions. The common scorpion is already well adapted for harsh conditions. Its exoskeleton is protective, its metabolism is slow enough to survive extended periods without food, its venom is effective against a wide range of prey. Radiation pressure over 2 centuries accelerated the growth factors in their biology and expanded their mass until they became something that nothing in the pre-war world would have chosen to encounter in a dark cave. They hunt by vibration. In the glowing sea, where the ground itself is faintly warm from the ongoing radioactive decay below the surface, their ability to sense movement through the ground makes them extraordinarily effective predators. They move quickly for their size. Their tail strikes with enough force to penetrate early-generation power armor, and they are genuinely intelligent by the standards of invertebrate predators, capable of coordinating their attacks in ways that suggest something more than simple instinct. The Deathclaw is the Commonwealth's apex predator, the creature that everything else, including heavily armed humans, carefully avoids when possible. Their ancestry is technically chameleons, small lizards that were used in pre-war military research programs, developing a human camouflage capability. FEV exposure and generations of radiation-driven mutation transform them into the upright, bipedal, 9 to 10 foot tall killing machines that populate the more open areas of the Commonwealth. What makes Deathclaws interesting beyond their immediate danger is their intelligence. They have demonstrated problem-solving ability, territorial behavior that involves planning rather than pure aggression, and some evidence of communication. A Deathclaw mother defending her eggs will defend the eggs specifically, adapting her tactics to whatever threat presents itself, rather than simply attacking anything that moves. This is not simple territorial instinct. This is something closer to parental reasoning. There is a mother Deathclaw and her eggs in a specific location in the Commonwealth, a place where the eggs have been disturbed and the mother is defending what remains. Returning the stolen egg to her, if you have it, produces a reaction that is unmistakably recognition and something very close to gratitude. The Deathclaw that would tear you apart without the egg in your hand allows you to approach with it, receives the egg carefully, and lets you go. Nick Valentine, if present, approves of this. So does Codsworth. So does Piper. Even the monsters in the Commonwealth have relationships. Super mutants in the Commonwealth are former humans transformed by forced FEV exposure. Unlike some regional variants of super mutants, who are more stable psychologically and sometimes capable of complex social organization, Commonwealth super mutants are generally aggressive and cognitively limited, their intelligence reduced by the transformation in ways that leave them oriented primarily toward fighting and capturing humans for conversion. The process of creating more super mutants requires human subjects, which explains both the kidnappings attributed to them across the Commonwealth and the reason their numbers don't decline despite consistent opposition from every organized faction. The exception is Strong, who is willing to travel with the sole survivor. Strong has retained more cognitive capacity than most of his kind, enough to pursue abstract goals like finding the quote he has heard about, the milk of human kindness, which he believes to be a literal substance that will make him and his people stronger. This search, literal in Strong's understanding of the goal, is also a kind of metaphor that the game allows to stand without forcing interpretation. The most violent creature in the Commonwealth is looking for kindness. Mirelurks are the least dramatic of the Commonwealth's major creatures, which makes them possibly the most genuinely strange. They are crustaceans, descendants of ordinary crabs and lobsters that spent 200 years mutating in the irradiated waters of the Charles River and Boston Harbor and the Atlantic. They emerge from water. They move in groups. They guard their eggs with the specific ferocity of animals whose survival depends on reproductive success in a hostile environment. Their carapaces are thick enough to deflect most small arms fire except at specific weak points. They smell terrible. What's strange about mirelurks is the extent to which they have maintained their original ecological role while scaling up dramatically. They are still aquatic creatures that come onto land to breed. They are still opportunistic scavengers of the shallow water zones. They still have the same basic body plan as their ancestors. They are just much, much larger, and they have developed a range of combat behaviors and some limited communication that their crustacean ancestors certainly didn't have. The mirelurk queen is an entirely different order of magnitude, an enormous, long-limbed creature that moves like something from a different evolutionary line entirely, capable of spitting acid at range and absorbing amounts of damage that would kill anything else in the Commonwealth. Whether she represents the pinnacle of mirelurk evolution or a separate mutation entirely is unclear. She appears rarely, and when she appears, the entire vicinity reorganizes itself around her presence. Radstags, the two-headed deer of the Commonwealth, are in many ways the most poignant mutants in the landscape. They are gentle creatures, still obviously deer in their behavior and movement, still occupying the niche that deer occupy in any ecosystem, grazing and alert and quick to flee. The extra head is clearly a mutation that developed before birth and was maintained through successive generations, but it doesn't appear to interfere with their function. They graze, they run from threats. They're present in fields and along stream banks, the most ordinary-looking things in an extraordinary landscape. Their presence, more than almost anything else in the Commonwealth, creates the specific quality of the place that makes it feel like a world rather than a set of human concerns scaled up into a landscape. The people of the Commonwealth live in a world where two-headed deer exist alongside the ruins of civilization, where mirelurks come out of the harbor to nest in the financial district, where deathclaws move through old suburbs in patterns that parallel the movement of the humans who used to live there. The wilderness and the human have never been as separate as people like to believe before the bombs, and after the bombs, they're even less so. The cats of the Commonwealth are ordinary cats. This is worth noting specifically. While everything around them developed two heads or grew to terrifying size or developed acid attacks or learned to use the environment as a hunting ground, cats remained exactly what they were. They adapted to the changed world by being cats in it, which it turns out was sufficient. They eat what they eat, they sleep where they sleep. They move through the ruins with the specific certainty of animals that have never had significant natural predators and consequently never developed the instinct to worry about their own safety. You find them everywhere. In Diamond City, exploring the market stalls. In Goodneighbor, curled up in doorways. In the ruins of Lexington, picking their way between the rubble with the same expression of mild disdain that cats have always had for the world's tendency to fall apart around them. They accept pets. They do not follow. They are not companions in the game's mechanical sense. They are just there, a thread of continuity connecting the world before to the world after, unchanged. Section 16. The Railroad Underground Freedom's Architecture. The Old North Church was built in 1723, the oldest surviving church building in Boston. 2 lanterns hung from its steeple on the 18th of April, 1775. The signal agreed upon between Paul Revere and Robert Newman. 2 if by sea, indicating that the British forces were crossing the Charles River by boat rather than moving overland. Paul Revere was arrested before completing his ride. It was Samuel Prescott who got through to Concord. History simplified this into Revere's ride because his version made a better poem. The railroad uses the church because the symbolism is available and because the location is good, central in the old part of the city, surrounded by the narrow streets of the north end that predate anything the modern city planners would have designed, acoustically insulated from the street by the thick colonial brick of the surrounding neighborhood. The bells are long gone. The wooden pews are long gone. The underground space beneath the church that the railroad uses as its headquarters predates the railroad by several centuries. You reach the headquarters by following the Freedom Trail to its end and solving the cipher. The cipher is elegant. The letters painted around a circle at the trail's final station, when read in order, spell out the password. You have to know to look for it, and you have to know to read the letters rather than the numbers, and the combination opens the door. It is the kind of security that relies on potential adversaries not knowing what they're looking for, which works until they do. Inside, the railroad operates. Desdemona sits in the center. PAM, the predictive analytic machine, runs probability calculations in a corner, and a Soltron chassis repurposed to house a tactical intelligence that models threats and outcomes with a precision that Desdemona finds useful and sometimes unsettling. Tinker Tom maintains the equipment and the communications network. Dr. Carrington handles medical needs with a bedside manner that is professional and warm, in exactly the way that someone has decided it should be, but which nonetheless manages to come across as genuine. The railroad's work is dangerous in a way that's hard to overstate. The Institute has synth infiltrators in multiple locations across the Commonwealth. Any of them could be reporting on railroad movements. Every safe house the railroad uses has the potential to be compromised. Every operative working in the field is operating in an environment where their organization is actively hunted by the most powerful and most secretive organization in the region. The railroad's response to this is a security culture that is, by necessity, paranoid. Agents change their appearances. Identities are disposable. Safe houses are rotated. Communications use codes and dead drops, the information compartmentalized, so that no single agent knows enough to betray the whole operation if captured. This is not elegance for its own sake. This is the only way to survive. But survival at this level of security has costs. The railroad's membership is small because recruitment has to be careful. The operations are constrained by the need to avoid exposure. The synths that the railroad helps reach safety come through a network that can only process so many at a time, limited by the human bandwidth of the agents running the routes and the memory-wiping technology that Amari's memory den provides. The individual synths who come through the railroad's network are the people the whole apparatus exists to serve, and meeting them, knowing that the complex machinery of Desdemona's caution is aimed at making this possible, gives the organization's work a human scale that its clandestine nature otherwise tends to obscure. A synth who has escaped from the Institute, who has been found by railroad agents in the field, who has had their Institute memories carefully removed and a new identity constructed, who has been walked through a series of safe houses across the Commonwealth until they reach a settlement far enough from the Institute's immediate interests to be relatively safe. Who begins then to build a life? What does that life look like? The synth doesn't know they were a synth. They have a new name, a backstory carefully constructed to survive casual scrutiny, a set of skills that survive the memory wipe, because skills are procedural rather than declarative memory, encoded differently in the synthetic brain. They know how to farm. They know how to repair things. They know how to cook. They don't know where they learned any of this. The backstory the railroad gave them says they learned in a settlement they grew up in, which no longer exists, which means the story can't be checked. They build a life on this foundation. They develop relationships. They accumulate real memories, experiences that belong to the person they are rather than the person they were. After enough years, the new memories outweigh the constructed backstory. They are who they are. Whether the Institute eventually finds them depends on how well the railroad covered the trail, how actively the Synth Retention Bureau is searching, whether the specific synth was important enough to the Institute's operations to justify extended pursuit. Some are found. Some aren't. The ones who aren't go on living. Deacon's story, to the extent that any version of it is true, involves a woman. A human woman. He was in love with her. Or he says he was, in one of the fragmented, partially retracted accounts that he offers in the right conversations. She was killed. Or he says she was. The railroad work that followed, The years of operation and disguise and refusal to have a stable identity may or may not connect to this loss. What seems to be true is that Deacon has been doing this work for long enough that the work has become who he is, the same way any sustained commitment eventually reshapes the person making it. He is very good at it. He is funny about it in a way that has either grown from genuine humor or been developed as a coping mechanism indistinguishable from genuine humor. He changes his appearance because he has to, and because by now the changing is also a way of not having to be one specific thing, which is possibly the more important function. He trusts Desdemona. This may be the most significant fact about him that isn't ambiguous. The railroad safe word. If you encounter a railroad agent in the field and need to identify yourself, is your affirmation of what the railroad believes and what it costs. In the game's lore, railroad agents recognize each other through specific call and response phrases, the kind of shibboleth that resistance networks use when everyone around them might be an enemy. The specific content of those phrases encodes the railroad's core conviction that the beings they're helping are people and that their freedom matters, and that the work of securing it is worth whatever it costs. This is also, not coincidentally, an argument about the cost of belief. The railroad pays heavily for what it believes. People die, operations fail, safe houses get raided. The Institute finds escaped synths and reclaims them. Every loss is both an operational failure and a moral failure, a person's freedom that wasn't adequately protected, a life that was in the railroad's care and was lost anyway. Desdemona carries these losses the way you carry heavy things when you've decided that putting them down isn't an option. By not thinking about the weight directly, by focusing on the next task, by letting the work be the answer to the loss rather than the occasion for it. She is not callous. She has simply understood, over years of this work, that grief that stops the operation is grief that costs more than the original loss, and she has made the decision that's available to her, which is to keep going. The church's steeple, if you climb to the top, offers a view of the old north end of Boston that hasn't changed as dramatically as the rest of the city. The narrow streets below, the harbor beyond, gray in most weathers, the Bunker Hill Monument visible to the north, the city spreading west and south in its various states of ruin and reclamation. From up here, 2 lanterns in the windows would still be visible for miles. Section 17. Power Armor and the Bones of the War. Power armor existed before the Great War as a military technology, and its post-war persistence as one of the Commonwealth's most coveted resources says something important about what the war left behind and who got to keep it. The T-45 was the first generation to see widespread deployment, developed initially to extend the reach of American soldiers in the Anchorage campaign in Alaska. The Sino-American conflict over Alaska's oil reserves was long and difficult, fought in conditions that broke ordinary soldiers faster than supply lines could replace them. Power armor gave individual soldiers the durability and firepower of small vehicles, while maintaining the flexibility of human movement. The Anchorage campaign ended in American victory partly because of the T-45's battlefield effectiveness. By the 23rd of October 2077, the armor had been through several generations of development. The T-51, which improved on the T-45 in almost every respect, was the standard issue for active military forces by the war's end. The T-60, developed even later, represented a further refinement, with better integrated systems and more efficient fusion core use. And then there was the X-1, developed in the late stages of the war from recovered alien technology, the most advanced power armor ever produced, which existed only in small numbers when the war ended. In the Commonwealth of 2287, these suits are 200 years old. The T-45S that survive are mostly in severe disrepair, their fusion cores long since depleted, their servo mechanisms stiff with oxidation, their ceramic plates cracked or missing. A working T-45 suit is valuable. A complete T-45 suit in good condition is exceptional. A T-60 suit in working order represents more wealth than most Commonwealth settlements can accumulate in a generation of trade. The Brotherhood of Steel's deployment of power armor is one of the clearest demonstrations of their organizational capacity. They can maintain, repair, and operate power armor at scale, which requires not just the physical materials but the technical knowledge to keep the suits functional and the fusion cores to power them. Brotherhood Paladins in full T-60 armor are the most individually dangerous combatants in the Commonwealth by considerable margin. The emotional experience of wearing power armor in the game, the cockpit view through the helmet, the hydraulic sounds of the servo mechanisms, the sense of being enclosed and enhanced simultaneously, tracks something real about what the suits would actually feel like. They are not comfortable. They are not seamless. They require attention, require maintenance, require an understanding of their systems that takes real investment to develop. The Brotherhood trains for years before a paladin goes into combat in a full suit. The sole survivor figuring it out in a few minutes in Concord is a narrative convenience that the game acknowledges, roughly, by having the suit's systems interface explain themselves. The Fat Man, the portable nuclear launcher that the sole survivor finds in Concord, alongside the T-45 suit, was developed at Fort Strong, just south of Boston, as part of the Army's effort to provide infantry units with tactical nuclear capability. The device fires a modified mini-nuke, a small but genuinely nuclear device, at short to medium range. It is, by any pre-war ethical framework that was still functional, a war crime delivery system, a weapon specifically designed to expose civilians to radiation fallout. It was mass-produced. The Commonwealth is full of them. The mini-nuke rounds are scattered in military facilities and armories across the region, sitting in crates labeled with warnings that assume the people reading them will have access to the protective equipment and safety protocols of a functioning military institution. Nobody reading those labels in 2287 has either of those things. The Fat Man is just another weapon. This is the specific moral of the power armor and the heavy weapons scattered throughout the Commonwealth. The infrastructure of military violence outlasts the institutions that were supposed to control it by several centuries at minimum. The ethical frameworks that governed the creation and deployment of these weapons died with the civilization that created them. What remains is just the weapons, and whoever has the means to use them. The T-51 suit found at the Museum of Freedom in Concord has a history that the game doesn't explicitly document, but that the rust and the damage on the suit's exterior suggests. Whoever was wearing it didn't make it back. They left the suit in a cage in the museum basement, possibly intending to return for it, possibly planning to let someone else use it when the situation required. The situation required it 2 centuries later, and the sole survivor put it on. There are intact suits in locations across the Commonwealth that have been sitting untouched since the 23rd of October 2077. Military checkpoints where the soldiers died before they could get to the suits. Industrial facilities where the suits were in storage rather than in use when the bombs fell. Brotherhood members who were killed far from their base and left in the field, their suits gradually losing power as the fusion cores depleted over decades. Each of these represents a kind of archaeological site, the specific circumstances of the Great War preserved in the specific state of the suit, the inventory of the equipment around it, the terminal entries in nearby facilities. The fusion core is the limiting factor. Without a functioning fusion core, power armor is an immovable metal shell. The cores that still function are largely those that were stored properly before the war, in conditions that minimize the natural degradation of their materials. Some can still be found in pre-war storage, still producing power, because the engineering that went into them was good enough to outlast the civilization that built them. Others have degraded to the point where they produce only a fraction of their rated output. A depleted core is still worth something for its remaining charge. A fully charged core is worth considerably more. The economy of fusion cores is the economy of the pre-war world's most sophisticated product surviving into the post-war world. No one in the Commonwealth can manufacture them. No one has the facility or the materials or the technical knowledge for the full production process. The existing stock is finite and diminishing, and every hour a suit of power armor is in use depletes another core. The Brotherhood's ability to maintain their armor suggests either that they've found a way to recharge cores using the Prydwen's reactor, or that they have stockpiles substantial enough to sustain their operations for the foreseeable future. Fort Strong, just south of Boston, was where T-51 suits were manufactured and T-60 development was conducted. It was also a test facility for nuclear ordnance, which means it contains both power armor frames and quantities of mini-nuke material, making it one of the most militarily significant pre-war sites in the Commonwealth. The Brotherhood recognizes this and has made securing the facility a priority. The The super mutants who had taken it up before the Brotherhood's arrival did so for purely territorial reasons, the fort's substantial walls and pre-existing defensive infrastructure being useful regardless of the historical significance of what was manufactured there. Section 18. A ruined world's hidden beauties. There is a specific light that the Commonwealth gets in the late afternoon, when the cloud cover that sits over Boston most of the time breaks or thins and the sun comes through at an angle. The light hits the broken glass in the upper floors of the downtown skyscrapers and produces something that looks almost like fire, the ruins burning briefly with warmth before the clouds close again. It lasts about 10 minutes, maybe less. The quality of it is extraordinary. The Charles River at dawn, when the mist sits over the water in the brief cool before the day warms, looks like something from before the war, if you don't look at the banks too closely. The mirelurks are still under the surface, but the surface itself is smooth, gray-green, reflecting the sky. Herons have returned to the river, actual blue herons, larger than their pre-war ancestors and slightly iridescent in ways that suggest radiation has touched their genetics as it touches everything, but recognizably herons. They stand in the shallows. They wait. They strike at the surface and come up with something. The wildflowers that have colonized the ruins of the residential neighborhoods are mutations of pre-war species. Dandelions that grew tall and strange, their heads larger and more complex than pre-war ones, their stalks woody at the base. Goldenrod that has become something between a herb and a shrub, dense and fragrant, providing cover for small animals in the ruins of suburban backyards. Wild roses growing over collapsed garage walls, their flowers smaller than pre-war roses but more numerous. Clusters of pink and white against the brown of rusted metal. In the evening, from the right elevation, you can see the fireflies, or something that functions as fireflies. Small luminescent insects that produce the same cold light as their pre-war ancestors, but in colors that pre-war fireflies didn't have, green and blue, and occasionally a deep amber. They appear in the open areas between the ruins, in the old parks and the fields, moving in their characteristic random drift, each one a small pulse of light against the gathering dark. The Minutemen settlements, when they're working properly, have a light at night that's visible from miles away in the right conditions. Lanterns on the guard posts, fires in the settlement's central area, the warm glow of occupied buildings with functioning power. From a hill to the north on a clear night, with the right weather conditions, you can count the settlements by their lights, scattered across the landscape like embers of a fire that hasn't gone out yet. The art in the Commonwealth is worth noting. Pre-war paintings survive in the homes and galleries of the old city, their pigments dulled by 2 centuries of damp and temperature fluctuation, but their images still present. Street art, graffiti that was political or aesthetic or simply bored before the war, has been joined by post-war art. The sole survivor can find paintings in settlements made from whatever materials were available that document the post-war world in images that have no pre-war equivalent. A mural of a woman standing in power armor against a sunset. A series of paintings on the side of a garage in Sanctuary Hills that appear to be a narrative, a sequential art about survival and loss rendered in blue and gray. Carvings in wood and bone by craftspeople who never had access to formal artistic training, but who needed to make things anyway. The music in the Commonwealth, broadcast on the channels available through the Pip-Boy, is a window into what survived culturally. Galaxy News Radio, broadcasting from Diamond City, plays pre-war music almost exclusively. Ella Fitzgerald, the Ink Spots, the Andrew Sisters, the music of a world that ended before most of its listeners' grandparents were born, preserved on vinyl records that were manufactured to last and in digital formats that survived in the vaults. What the music does in the context of the Commonwealth is strange and layered. It is nostalgic for a world that nobody alive has experienced, except the sole survivor, who has experienced it but 200 years ago. The listeners of the Commonwealth hear it as history, the way people in our world might hear music from the medieval period, from so far away that its emotional content is about the distance itself rather than the specific experiences it originally documented. And yet the songs are about the same things all songs are about: love, loss, the desire for company, the beauty of an evening. These things persist. There is a settlement in the far northwest of the Commonwealth, Greygarden, where the Mr. Handy robots tend their crops. At night, when the work is done, They perform maintenance checks on each other and run diagnostic routines that produce a kind of mechanical conversation. Status reports, system checks, confirmations that everything is functioning within normal parameters. If you stand near them in the dark and listen, there's something almost hypnotic about it. The exchange of information between machines that have been performing this exchange for 200 years, that will keep performing it until something breaks that can't be fixed. The steady, low-register hum of systems maintaining themselves. The Boston Public Library, in the Back Bay neighborhood, is one of the most intact pre-war buildings in the city. The structure survived the bombs better than most, and the books inside, while damaged by water and time, are more numerous than in any other single location in the Commonwealth. The ghouls who have moved in among the shelves are feral, which means they're dangerous and not conversational, but they move between the stacks in patterns that suggest the space still means something to them at whatever level of cognition feral ghouls operate at. They are not disturbing the books. They are not tearing the shelves down. They're just there, among the books, doing whatever feral ghouls do when nothing is threatening them. The library's card catalog room, when the sole survivor finds it, contains the last entries made by the librarian who was working on the 23rd of October 2077. The entries describe the ordinary work of a library, cataloging acquisitions, noting overdue books, corresponding with other institutions about interlibrary loans. The last entry, made at 9:42 a.m. on the 23rd of October 2077, notes the return of a biography of John Adams and the overdue status of a collection of poetry that hasn't come back. The due date is 2 weeks away. The librarian had no way to know that the due date would arrive without them. That's the Commonwealth. In the details. In the small things that survived intact and sideways into a world that doesn't have the same context for them anymore. A library catalog entry about an overdue book. A wedding ring on a skeleton in a bathtub. A child's drawing on a refrigerator. A flag still flying from a pole in front of a federal building. The fabric shredded by 2 centuries of weather, but the pole still standing, the clips at the top still holding the remnants. The flag is not a symbol of the United States anymore. The United States doesn't exist. The flag is just a piece of fabric, really, that someone made in a factory somewhere, and that was raised on a pole by someone following protocol, on a morning that turned out to be among the last ordinary mornings there ever were. It has survived the bombs and the winters and the radstorms and the centuries. It is still there. Section 19. What the Commonwealth chooses to remember. History in the Commonwealth is a project, not a given. The physical record of the past is fragmentary. Some things survive the bombs, some survive the subsequent 2 centuries, and the selection is arbitrary in ways that have nothing to do with what was important and everything to do with what was durable. You can't reconstruct a society from what happens to survive. You reconstruct it from what the survivors chose to keep and tell. The Diamond City School teaches history, or a version of it. The version emphasizes the American Revolution heavily, which makes sense given the geography. The Battle of Bunker Hill, the Battle of Lexington and Concord, Paul Revere's Ride, the Minutemen of 1775, all of this happened within a few miles of where the school students are sitting. The history of the Great War is less well covered, partly because the documentary record is sparse and partly because teaching children about exactly how the pre-war civilization destroyed itself requires a level of political delicacy that a school operating in the shadow of the Institute hasn't quite figured out how to manage. The Minutemen as a modern organization lean heavily on the Revolutionary War imagery, the tricorn hats, the muskets, the rhetoric about freedom and self-determination. This is partly practical, a recognizable visual identity that distinguishes them from other armed groups, and partly ideological, a way of connecting their current work to a longer tradition of people standing up against organized power in exactly this geographic region. Preston Garvey understands this connection viscerally, even if he doesn't always articulate it explicitly. The Minutemen he's trying to rebuild are operating in the same towns where the original Minutemen organized. They're defending the same fields and roads. The principles are the same, or close enough that the connection matters. The railroad's use of the Underground Railroad metaphor is more deliberate and more philosophically loaded, requiring its members to make an analogy between enslaved African Americans seeking freedom in the 19th century and synths seeking freedom in the 23rd. This analogy is uncomfortable for exactly the reasons that make it meaningful. It demands that you take seriously the claim that synthetic beings are persons, that their freedom matters in the same way that human freedom matters, that the institution keeping them in servitude is as morally indefensible as the institution that kept human beings enslaved. Not everyone in the railroad accepts the full weight of the analogy. Some members are there because they have personal reasons to help synths, because they know one or are related to someone who might be one, because the railroad is doing something and doing something is better than doing nothing. The analogy is there for the ones who are ready to think about what it costs them to take it seriously. The Brotherhood of Steel carries its own historical narrative, one that centers on the catastrophic potential of unchecked technology and the necessity of a responsible guardianship class. Their self-understanding draws on military tradition, on the idea of an order of knights whose duty is to protect the realm from specific identified threats. The knight imagery is explicit in their rank structure: knight, paladin, elder. The vocabulary of medieval chivalry applied to power armor and laser weapons. This self-image has a self-serving quality that members of the Brotherhood don't tend to notice because they're inside it. The knights of history weren't necessarily protectors of anyone except themselves and their patrons. The Brotherhood's claim to be protecting humanity from the dangers of advanced technology is a claim that conveniently positions them as the sole legitimate holders of that same technology. The ideology and the self-interest are perfectly aligned. Covenant, that too-clean settlement with its safe test and its disappearing visitors, represents a third approach to history: selective amnesia. The community has built itself on the story that the only threat is the Institute's synths, that any precautions taken against that threat are justified, that the willingness to harm people who might be synths is a form of community protection rather than ordinary paranoia given institutional form. The history Covenant doesn't tell itself is the history of what happened to the people who failed the safe test, and it doesn't tell that story because telling it would require acknowledging what Covenant actually is. The holotapes scattered through the Commonwealth are, collectively, the history that official narratives don't contain. The personal ones especially. The audio diaries of people who knew the bombs were coming and recorded their thoughts in the last hours. The messages to family members who never came to collect them. The documentation of small events that mattered intensely to someone who is long gone and have survived entirely by accident. These recordings are the texture of the lost world, the way it felt to live in it. The ordinary concerns and specific joys and petty annoyances that historical accounts of civilizations almost never capture. One holotape in the ruins of a house in the fens contains a father reading a bedtime story to his children. You can hear the children interrupting with questions. You can hear the father answering with the patient repetition of someone who has answered these questions before and knows he'll answer them again. The story he's reading is about a rabbit who lives in a forest and solves problems by being cleverer than the other animals. The tape runs out before the story ends. The children are gone. The father is gone. The house is rubble. The rabbit in the story got away. Section 20. Rest, return, and the meaning of continuing. There is a moment that happens in extended play of Fallout 4 that players who have spent significant time in the Commonwealth know well. You've been moving through ruins for hours. You've been solving problems, sometimes violently, sometimes through conversation, sometimes just by being present in the right place at the right time. You've watched factions rise and fall with your involvement. You've built settlements and broken them. You've found companions and lost them and found them again. And then you come to a hill. Maybe it's the hill outside Sanctuary Hills, looking north. Maybe it's one of the elevated highway sections that gives you a view of the whole of Boston spread out below. Maybe it's just a patch of slightly higher ground in the middle of the fens, not even dramatic, just enough elevation to see beyond the immediate obstacle. The Commonwealth spreads out ahead and behind and to the sides. All of it. The city to the east. The settlements to the west, their lights in the evening. The glowing sea's permanent pale luminescence on the southwestern horizon. The harbor. The Prydwen if you're at the right stage in the story. The sky full of the particular quality of light that this version of the post-apocalypse produces. And the feeling that arrives, if you've been in the world long enough to have earned it, is complicated. It is not triumphant. It is not satisfied in any simple sense. It is something more like the feeling of being situated. Knowing where you are, having a sense of the shape of the space you've been moving through, the connections between things that weren't visible up close becoming visible from altitude. The Commonwealth is not a solved problem. It will never be a solved problem. The Institute can be destroyed, and the synths freed, and the Brotherhood of Steel accommodated or defeated, and the Railroad's mission accomplished or abandoned, and the Minutemen's settlements networked and defended, and still the Commonwealth will be itself. Still dangerous, still scarce, still requiring constant work just to maintain what's been built. Still full of people making difficult choices with inadequate information in conditions that don't reward patience. This is actually fine. Not comfortable, but fine. The Commonwealth teaches, if you let it, that the ongoing nature of difficulty is not a bug in existence that better planning would eliminate. It is the structure of existence itself, the shape of what it means to be alive in a world that isn't finished with you yet. The sole survivor woke up with nothing. 200 years of sleep, a lost spouse, a stolen child, a civilization that had been replaced by what the civilization's worst decisions produced. They walked out of Vault 111 into the ruin, and they started doing what needed doing, because there was nothing else to do that would serve any purpose, and because the alternative was sitting in a ruined house that used to be theirs and waiting for something to come and take the waiting away. The Minutemen grew. Diamond City kept its school. Nick Valentine found missing people. Piper Wright ran her newspaper. Codsworth tended his garden. Preston Garvey said another settlement needs your help. Again and again and again, and the settlements needed help and got it, and they stood afterward, most of them, and they grew food and kept their walls and sent light into the night sky that could be seen from the right hill in the right weather. The dog slept at someone's feet. This is the world. The world is ongoing. The Commonwealth at night is quiet in its particular way. Not silent, because silence in the Commonwealth is always temporary, always the gap between one sound and the next. But at certain hours, in the right weather, in a settlement far enough from the city that the Brotherhood's vertibirds aren't passing overhead, the sounds that reach you are the sounds of the world, rather than the sounds of human conflict. Wind in the ruins, the movement of water in the river, distant animal sounds, the calls of creatures adapted to this world and inhabiting it fully. Whatever the bombs destroyed, they did not destroy this. The world went on, modified, transformed, carrying its catastrophe in every cell of every living thing, in every rusted car and every broken window, in the soil itself. But ongoing, still here. Still producing the specific music of wind and water and life that has characterized this small planet for its entire existence, regardless of what the creatures on it chose to do with the remarkable accident of consciousness that evolution gave them. The Commonwealth is a place where that accident continues, imperfectly, violently, with a great deal of unnecessary suffering and occasional extraordinary kindness, but it continues. And in the morning, when the light comes through the clouds over the Charles River and hits the broken glass in the towers of the old city, and the herons stand in the shallows, and the wildflowers open on the ruins of the suburban yards, and Codsworth starts his morning maintenance routine in the garden of a house where his family slept for 200 years and has now woken up. The world is beautiful. It has always been beautiful. The bombs didn't take that. They couldn't. If you've been here with me for all of this, through the history and the factions and the creatures and the ruins and the people and the sky above all of it, then thank you, genuinely. Drop a comment telling me who your favorite companion was, or which faction you chose, or just where in the world you're listening from. These stories feel better shared. Hit subscribe if you want more of this, and find somewhere comfortable to rest. The Commonwealth will be there when you return. It always is. Sleep well. Section 21. The Economics of the Wasteland Caps, Trade, and Value. The Nuka-Cola bottle cap is one of the more elegant economic solutions the post-apocalyptic world accidentally stumbled into. Before the Great War, a bottle cap was worth exactly nothing. It was the discarded bit of metal that protected a carbonated beverage from the air until consumption, at which point it became litter. The caps had a characteristic shape, that slight crown crimp with the Nuka-Cola logo stamped into the metal, and they were produced in the billions. After the war, several things happened simultaneously that elevated the cap to its position as the dominant currency of the post-war wasteland. First, the old monetary system based on paper Federal Reserve notes simply ceased to function the moment the government that backed them ceased to exist. Paper money requires institutional faith. The faith that the authority which printed it is real and powerful, and will maintain the value it's claiming the paper represents. When the bombs killed the federal government, they killed that faith. The paper survived. Its value did not. Second, the caps were durable. Metal doesn't rot or degrade the way paper does. A bottle cap from 2077 in 2287 is still a bottle cap from 2077, indistinguishable from any other. You can't counterfeit it successfully because the specific metal composition and the production process produced caps with consistent characteristics that are difficult to replicate with post-war manufacturing capacity. Third, and most importantly, someone with enough influence in the early post-war period had the idea that bottle caps could function as currency and acted on it in ways that spread the practice. Whether this was a conscious decision or an emergent convention that multiple communities arrived at independently is a question economic historians of the Commonwealth would be arguing about if economic historians existed and had access to the archives. The result is that caps are everywhere. They're found in the bottoms of old bags. They accumulate in safes and drawers and pockets. Every trading interaction in the Commonwealth is denominated in caps. A day's labor for a settlement is worth a certain number of caps. A good meal at Diamond City's noodle robot is a certain number. A weapon capable of stopping a super mutant is a lot of caps. Power armor in working condition is more caps than most people have in their lives. The value hierarchy of the cap economy roughly tracks the pre-war value hierarchy of goods. Food and water are baseline and abundant enough to be cheap. Weapons and medicine are more expensive, requiring either specialized knowledge to produce or rare materials. Technical expertise is very expensive. Advanced technology is nearly priceless. What's different is the relationship between goods that require ongoing institutional infrastructure to produce and goods that can be made by an individual with the right skills. Pre-war, mass production made factory goods cheaper than handmade equivalents. Post-war, factory goods are either unavailable or prohibitively rare because the factories don't run anymore, and handmade goods from a skilled craftsperson are the baseline, the thing you can actually get rather than the premium version of a thing. A gunsmith in the Commonwealth is worth considerably more than a gunsmith in the pre-war world. Their knowledge is not easily replaceable. The supply chains that pre-war manufacturing used to provide consistent materials and components don't exist, so the gunsmith has to improvise with what's available, which requires creativity as well as technical knowledge. The weapons they produce are idiosyncratic, personalized to available materials, often more robust and repairable than their pre-war equivalents, because repairability is a design constraint now. In a way, it wasn't when replacements were readily available. The same principle applies to doctors, engineers, farmers with specific knowledge of radiation-adapted cultivation, traders who know the routes well enough to navigate safely and who have established relationships with suppliers along the way. Expertise is wealth in the Commonwealth in a more direct way than in the organized economies that preceded it. The caravans that run between settlements are the arteries of the cap economy. They carry goods and information, because information about what's available where and at what price is itself a valuable commodity. The major trading companies, like Bunker Hill's Cabot-linked operations and the independent traders who run specific routes, maintain the logistical infrastructure that makes settlement specialization possible. A settlement that grows primarily crops can trade for the weapons it needs rather than diverting labor to produce them, if the trading network is reliable enough. The trading network is not always reliable. Raiders disrupt routes regularly. Occasionally, caravan operators are killed or robbed. Weather delays, creature attacks, power armor breakdowns, all of these create uncertainty in supply chains that settlement economies have limited ability to absorb. A settlement that runs short of medicine because a caravan was hit is a settlement with people who might die from treatable conditions. The fragility of the supply network is a fragility of life itself. Bartering exists alongside the cap economy, especially in smaller settlements and in direct trading between individuals. The ratio of barter value to cap value is negotiated situationally, which means it's subject to the specific power dynamics of the transaction. Someone desperate for water will trade more for it than someone adequately supplied. A trader who knows they're the only source of medicine in an area can set their own price. The ethics of price setting in scarcity conditions are not something the Commonwealth has had time or institutional capacity to codify. The gunners, who function as a mercenary army of considerable size and effectiveness, are a caps-based organization in a particular way. Their entire operational logic runs on payment. Caps come in from whoever is hiring them. Caps go out to the soldiers they employ. The organizational form is modern corporate mercenary, translated into the post-war context, with all the ethical flexibility that implies. They are not ideological. They protect settlements when paid to protect them, and attack settlements when paid to attack them. The same town might be a client and a target at different points in time depending on who's paying what. This makes the gunners predictable and unpredictable simultaneously. Their behavior is always explicable in terms of the payment structure, which means if you understand who's paying them for what you can anticipate their actions. But the payment structure itself can change quickly, and the gunners' lack of ideological commitment means they don't reliably favor any particular outcome. They are, in their own way, one of the Commonwealth's more honest institutions. They do exactly what they're paid to do, and they don't pretend otherwise. Section 22. The Architecture of Loss, How the Commonwealth Stores Its Grief. There is a way of reading the Commonwealth that treats it entirely as a political and economic landscape, as the setting for choices about factions and power and resource allocation. This reading is valid. The game supports it. But there is another reading, which is the Commonwealth as a landscape of accumulated grief, every ruin holding a story that ended badly, every intact object evidence of a moment when things were okay before they weren't. The wedding rings in the game. This is a specific thing that deserves mention. They appear throughout the Commonwealth, worn on skeletons, sitting on nightstands, in drawers in houses where nobody lives anymore. They are functionally worthless. Junk items that can be sold for a small number of caps, useful only as a source of materials if you're crafting and need the specific metals. But the game includes them in enormous numbers, distributes them through every residential space, puts them in the obvious places where real people put rings when they're not wearing them. This is not an accident of design. It is a choice. The wedding rings are an argument about what the ruins mean, delivered through object placement rather than dialogue. Every ring is evidence that someone was married here, that there were two people who made a promise to each other, and that they lived in a house that still stands in some form, and that the promise outlasted the civilization that witnessed it, but not the people who made it. The sole survivor wears their own ring when they first wake up. In Vault 111, the game gives you the option to remove it. Whether you do or don't is a character choice that the game doesn't judge either way, but which carries weight. The ring is a connection to the morning on the porch, to the person who is beside you then and isn't now. It is also just a piece of metal. Both things are true. The Commonwealth holds both things at once. There are family photographs in the ruined houses, actual framed photographs, visible through the game's environmental design on the walls and mantels and nightstands of every residential space. The photographs show the world before the 23rd of October 2077, the specific version of American middle-class suburban life that the Fallout setting depicts with its specific retro-futurist aesthetic. Families in front of their fusion-powered cars. Children in school pictures with their neat hair and their forced smiles. Couples on vacations, birthday parties with cakes. None of these people survived. The photographs are the only evidence that they existed, and the photographs are there in the ruins for anyone to find, which means nobody is left to care about preserving them specifically. They're just part of the general debris of the fallen world. The specific irony is that photographs are more durable than the humans they document. Paper decays, but slowly, and behind glass in a sealed frame it can last centuries. The family in the photograph on the bedroom wall survived the bombs as an image in a way they didn't survive them as people. Terminal entries, the personal logs and official records stored in the pre-war computer systems that still operate throughout the Commonwealth, are the richest source of the world's pre-war voice. The game uses them carefully, scattering them through every significant location, building complete pictures of the people who worked and lived in each space from the fragments of their daily correspondence. The scientist who was excited about a research breakthrough 3 days before the bombs fell, the office worker who was complaining about a colleague the morning of October 23rd, the teenager who had just asked someone to prom. The last entries are always the most affecting. The ones made on October 23rd itself, when people were registering the news and not yet sure what it meant, or sure and still writing because writing was how they processed things. The ones made in the days after, when the survivors who had shelter were documenting the collapse of the world outside. The ones from weeks later when the scope of the catastrophe had become fully apparent and people were still alive and still recording because the act of recording felt like maintaining a thread of continuity that the bombs were trying to sever. The grief of the Commonwealth is not only for the people who died in the bombs. 2 centuries of post-war life have produced their own losses, their own tragedies, accumulated over generations in every settlement and every family. The Ghoul family driven from Diamond City during McDonough's pogrom, the children who grew up knowing that their neighbors chose ideology over friendship, carries its own weight. The Quincy Massacre, recent enough to be within living memory, with its specific count of the people who died in it, sits in Preston Garvey's mind like a stone. Every faction war has a casualty list. Every settlement has graves. Every caravan runner on the road has left someone behind, has people who depend on the money the route provides, and who recalibrate the risk calculation every time a fellow trader doesn't come back from a run. The grief is not historical. It is ongoing. It renews itself daily in the conditions of the Commonwealth, which are conditions that produce loss continuously. What the Commonwealth has developed, or is developing, is a relationship to this grief that is neither denial nor paralysis. The settlements that work are the ones whose inhabitants have somehow incorporated loss into a worldview that continues to include the future. You plant crops even though the farm might be raided. You build walls, even though the walls might not be enough. You make friends even though the wasteland might take them. You go on. This is not stoicism in the philosophical sense. The careful cultivation of emotional detachment from the things that might be lost. The people of the Commonwealth are not detached. They love their settlements and their communities and each other with the specific intensity that comes from knowing that nothing is guaranteed. The grief when something is lost is real and complete. What follows the grief, eventually, is the continuation, the return to the work, the next morning's planting. The ruined houses hold both the loss and the evidence that something worth losing was there. Every ring on every skeleton was once on a living hand, worn by a person who put it on at a moment of commitment and kept it on through everything that followed. The commitment might not have lasted. The ring did. And in the ruins of the house where they lived together, whether the commitment held or not, the ring is still there as evidence that they were here, that they tried to build something, that it mattered enough to mark. Section 23. Night Watch the Commonwealth After Dark. The guards who walk the perimeter of Diamond City's walls at night have a specific quality of attention that you don't see in people who are doing something comfortable. They're not relaxed, but they're not frightened either, in any active sense. They are simply aware, constantly, of the boundary they're watching, the line between the inside and the outside, between the light of the settlement and the dark of the wasteland beyond. The darkness outside settlement walls is genuine darkness, the kind that has been largely absent from human experience for several generations in the developed world we know. No streetlights, no ambient glow from distant cities, no aircraft lights moving across the sky, nothing electric in the landscape outside the settlements except the scattered glow of raider camps and the lights of the occasional trader moving through the dark with lanterns. In the darkness between settlements, the Commonwealth resolves into its constituent elements: sound and light and movement. The 3 things that tell you whether something is a threat or not. The sound of the wind through ruins, the specific creak of a building settling, the distant howl of something that isn't quite a wolf, descended from wolves but different now, in ways that the sound encodes, the slight ambient glow of the radiated groundwater in certain areas, the ponds that glow faintly and that animals avoid and ferals gravitate toward. The guard on the Diamond City wall has internalized all of this. They know the rhythms of the night outside the walls. They know which sounds are the building settling and which sounds are something moving. They know the difference between a raider camp's firelight and the steady glow of a lantern on a trader's cart. They know when the mirelurks in the river are active and when they're not. They have been learning the dark outside these walls for the duration of their posting, and the knowledge is embodied, part of their nervous system, faster than conscious thought. This is one of the skills the Commonwealth developed that didn't exist in the Old World. Literacy, in the specific language of the post-apocalyptic night. The ability to read darkness as a text, to extract information from the absence of light rather than its presence, to navigate and assess and survive in conditions that the Old World would have called simply dangerous and tried to eliminate with infrastructure. The settlers in the Commonwealth settlements have a relationship with their physical environment that the pre-war population of those same neighborhoods didn't have. They know their land. They know the patterns of the radiation storms, where they come from and which directions they travel and how long they usually last. They know the animal movement patterns in their area, where the death claws come from and where they go, which routes are safer and which should be avoided. They know the seasonal variations in crop yield and what they mean for food stores through the winter. This knowledge is practical and hard-won, and it is also beautiful, in the way that any deep knowledge of a specific place is beautiful. The woman at Abernathy Farm knows her soil the way farmers have always known their soil. By its texture when she picks it up, by its color in different lights, by the way it drains after a rain or retains moisture in a dry stretch. Her knowledge of this specific few acres of Massachusetts earth is more detailed and more precise than any pre-war agricultural survey could have produced, because her life depends on it in a way that the survey takers' lives didn't. The night in Sanctuary Hills, when it's working as a settlement and Preston's people have settled there, has a specific sound. The water pumps running, the generator's low pulse, the occasional sound of a guard calling out to another, the wind in the trees that have grown up around the old houses. If Codsworth is there, his maintenance routines after dark, the gentle whirring of his circular saw cleaning something, or the quiet hiss of his flamer doing controlled burns on the plants that don't belong. And under all of it, the same sounds that have been in this place for the entire human habitation of the region: crickets. The specific sound of New England insects in the dark, that high continuous vibration that is the insect world's version of the ambient light of cities, a constant reminder that you're not the only thing alive, that even the catastrophe didn't end everything. They've mutated, probably. Most things have. The crickets of the Commonwealth are likely different from their pre-war ancestors in ways that are invisible at this scale of observation. But the sound is the same, or close enough that it carries the same quality, the same effect on the nervous system that crickets have always had. A sound that says the night is functioning normally, that the ecosystem is in whatever equilibrium it has arrived at, that you are in a place where life is ongoing. The stars come out in the Commonwealth with the specific abundance of a sky that hasn't had significant light pollution in 200 years. In the pre-war period, the city of Boston generated enough light to wash out most of the night sky for miles in every direction. The residents of suburban Massachusetts couldn't see the Milky Way from their backyards. They could see the bright planets and perhaps a few hundred stars on a good night, but the richness of a truly dark sky was something they had to drive away from the city to experience. Now the Milky Way is visible from Diamond City's rooftops. From the top of the Museum of Freedom in Concord, on a clear night, the sky is dense with stars from horizon to horizon, the galaxy spreading across the overhead in a band of light that makes the ruined city below seem very small. The same atoms that were fused in the stars are in the ruins, in the radiation, in the bodies of the people sleeping in those ruins. The scale goes all the way down and all the way up simultaneously. One of the settlers in Sanctuary Hills, if you build enough up there, will sometimes sit on the roof of their house at night and look at the sky. They're not doing anything specific. They're not waiting for something. They're just looking at the stars the way people have always looked at the stars when they had a moment of stillness and the sky was clear and the night was quiet enough to notice. The Commonwealth will be there tomorrow. The work will continue. Another settlement will need help. The factions will continue their agendas. The synths will continue their complicated relationship with the category of personhood. The Institute will continue operating in its underground rooms. The Brotherhood will circle in their vertibirds. But right now, tonight, this person on their roof is looking at the Milky Way. And the stars, for their part, are exactly as they were before the bombs, exactly as they were before the Commonwealth of Massachusetts existed, exactly as they will be long after the last fusion core is depleted and the last settlement's light goes out. Patient, precise, absolutely indifferent to the human drama below them in the most beautiful possible way. Not hostile, just operating at a scale where the whole of human history, the whole of the apocalypse and its aftermath, is less than an eye blink. From up there, if you could see from up there, the glowing sea would be a small, warm light on a small, dark planet around a medium-sized star in an unremarkable arm of one of hundreds of billions of galaxies. Not nothing, not everything, just the specific thing that it is, carrying on. Rest now. The Commonwealth will still be there. It always is. Sleep well. Section 24. The children of the Commonwealth growing up in the ruins. The children of Diamond City go to school. This is easy to say and difficult to fully appreciate. They go to school, which means someone built a building for the purpose, furnished it with the remnants of pre-war educational materials that survived in libraries and homes, recruited someone with the patience and knowledge to teach, and maintained the whole structure against the competing demands of a settlement economy that always has more urgent, immediate needs than the long-term investment of education. Education in the Commonwealth is a form of defiance. Every child who learns to read is a small act of refusal. A refusal to let the apocalypse lower the ceiling of human possibility to what the immediate conditions require. Survival requires a certain skill set, and that skill set can be transmitted through practice rather than formal instruction. Teaching children to read, to do arithmetic, to understand history however imperfectly it survives, is not survival in any immediate sense. It is the investment in a future where survival is no longer the only consideration. The children who grow up in Diamond City have a specific relationship to their world that differs from the children of the small settlements in the outer Commonwealth. Diamond City's children are urban, in the particular way that living within a large and complex community makes you. They navigate social hierarchies. They understand commerce, because the market is their playground. They know who the important people are and who aren't, and why. They grow up with the specific savviness of children raised in a place that is, by post-war standards, cosmopolitan. The children of smaller settlements like Abernathy Farm or Covenant have a different formation, a deep knowledge of their specific place, the land and the animals and the patterns of the land's behavior through the seasons. They know fewer people and know them more thoroughly. They have a relationship with the natural environment, such as it is post-war, that the Diamond City child doesn't develop the same way. Neither formation is better for the Commonwealth's needs. Both produce adults who are capable in ways that the situation requires. The Diamond City child who becomes a trader knows how to read people and negotiate. The Abernathy child who takes over the farm knows the soil in ways that keep the settlement fed. Both of them are essential. What neither of them has, and what the sole survivor uniquely has, is knowledge of the before. The comparison point. The ability to hold the pre-war world next to the post-war world and measure the distance between them. The children who grow up in the Commonwealth don't mourn the old world because they never had it. They don't experience the ruins as loss in the way that the sole survivor does, because the ruins are simply what the world looks like. The cracked concrete and the rusted cars and the broken windows are background, are normal, are home. This is both a kind of poverty, the absence of knowing what else was possible, and a kind of freedom, the absence of grief for something that was always outside your experience. The children of Sanctuary Hills who grow up in the repurposed houses don't feel the weight of what those houses used to be. They just feel the weight of what they are now. Home, imperfect, available, theirs. There's a child in Diamond City named Sheng Kowalski who sells purified water outside the market and talks to the sole survivor with the specific combination of commercial instinct and genuine sweetness that comes from a kid who has been participating in the settlement economy since they were old enough to carry a bucket. He knows what water is worth. He knows how to read a potential customer. He also, when you talk to him enough, reveals a genuine curiosity about the world outside the walls, about the Commonwealth that he's heard about but hasn't seen, about what's out there beyond the green monster. That curiosity is the seed of the next generation's explorers and traders and Minutemen and, possibly, the people who will build something better than what exists. The kids growing up in Diamond City know the world is large. They know the ruins are full of history and also full of danger. They are calibrating their understanding of what's possible and what's worth risking themselves for. What they make of that calibration, when they're grown, is the future of the Commonwealth. The children of the railroad's allies don't know their allies. The railroad's work is necessarily invisible to people who aren't part of it, which includes the families of agents and the communities that host safe houses. A child in a settlement that happens to be a railroad waypoint knows that occasionally a stranger arrives, stays briefly, and moves on. They don't know what that stranger is, or where they came from, or where they're going. The child just sees a person, tired and briefly safe, eating a meal before continuing. This is also a kind of formation, exposure, without explanation, to the fact that the world contains people in need of help, that giving it is something that adults around you choose to do, that this choice is normal and unremarkable in the way that all moral choices become normal when you grow up watching them made. The settlement children are learning to read the world the way their parents learned to read it, through experience, through attention, through the patient accumulation of knowledge about what works and what doesn't, what the land requires and what people need, and how to close the gap between the two. They are learning what it means to be alive in a world that requires everything from you and gives you exactly what you build with your own hands. It is not a comfortable education. It is the only one available. And the kids in Diamond City going to school in the morning, their boots on the dirt of what used to be a baseball field, their notebooks made from whatever paper was available, their teachers improvising curricula from whatever survived the bombs, are doing something that would look almost ordinary from the right angle. Children going to school. In the ruin of everything else, children going to school. The Commonwealth persists. Section 25. The roads not taken possibilities in the ruins. Every major structure in the Commonwealth was built for a purpose that no longer applies, and the gap between its original purpose and its current state contains a kind of potential energy, the possibility of repurposing that some of the Commonwealth's most creative inhabitants have been acting on for 2 centuries. The highway infrastructure is the most visible example. The elevated roadways, the interchanges, the on- and off-ramps that once managed the movement of hundreds of thousands of vehicles through the greater Boston area form a 3-dimensional network above the city that has been colonized by everyone from Raider lookout positions to Brotherhood patrol routes. The highways are pathways through the city that operate at a different level than the street grid, connecting distant points directly while bypassing the rubble that makes street-level navigation difficult. The elevated train infrastructure is another one. The old MBTA system, the Green Line and the Red Line and the others, still has tracks in many places, and the stations, those utilitarian underground chambers tiled in white that characterize the Boston subway system, have been repurposed into everything from raider fortresses to railroad safehouses to the location of one of the most unusual characters in the game, the art dealer, whose story involves pre-war paintings and post-war value systems in ways that reward investigation. The Corvega assembly plant, that enormous Raiders-occupied factory near Lexington, represents the industrial capacity of pre-war Massachusetts, preserved in non-functional amber. The machinery is still there. The raw materials, sheet metal and rubber compounds, and the components of an automobile assembly line are still in the building. Nobody can run the factory because running a factory requires a supply chain for inputs and a distribution network for outputs and technical expertise distributed across dozens of specializations and institutional knowledge accumulated over decades. None of those things exist in the Commonwealth, but the materials are there. And one of the understated arguments of the settlement building system is that the materials that can't be used for their original industrial purpose can be repurposed for the construction needs of post-war communities. The sheet metal that didn't become car panels becomes walls. The industrial shelving becomes storage systems in settlements. The machinery becomes scrap that becomes new things in the hands of people, inventive enough to see what they need and what's available. This is the specific intelligence that the Commonwealth has been developing for 200 years, the ability to look at what exists and see what else it could be. The Minutemen's laser muskets, those jury-rigged weapons that fire beams of energy from a mechanism that looks like it was assembled from whatever happened to be lying around, are a perfect example. Someone took the knowledge of laser weapons, which were real before the war, and the materials available in the Commonwealth, which are not the materials of a working laser weapons factory, and bridge the gap with ingenuity. The settlements that work are the ones whose inhabitants have developed this kind of creative repurposing to a high art. They have turned parking structures into fortified walls. They have turned commercial greenhouses into residential spaces. They have taken the architectural bones of pre-war Massachusetts and rebuilt from them something that bears resemblance to its origins, while being entirely itself. There is a small settlement in an old mill building north of Concord that has made itself out of the mill's original industrial infrastructure in ways that would have delighted the original engineers of those mechanisms. The water wheel still turns, generating a small but reliable amount of power. The mill's original gear systems, designed to transfer the water wheel's rotation into useful mechanical work, have been modified to serve different purposes. The whole thing runs quietly and efficiently and represents exactly the kind of deep understanding of existing infrastructure that produces reliable post-war engineering. Nobody designed this. The person who figured it out, whoever they were 2 or 3 generations ago, just paid attention to what was there and thought about what it could do. That's the entire method. The sole survivor can engage with this impulse through the settlement system, designing and building communities from the available materials, deciding what each space needs and how to provide it within the constraints of what exists. The experience of doing this, of turning a ruin into a home, of building something from what's available rather than what you'd choose if choice were unconstrained, teaches something about what settlement building in the Commonwealth actually involves. You work with what you have. You make the thing you need from the thing that's there. You discover in the process that the thing you needed and the thing you made aren't quite the same, and you modify your understanding of what you needed. You keep going. The roads not taken in the Commonwealth are mostly roads that can't be taken yet, that require resources or knowledge or institutional capacity that doesn't exist at the current level of post-war civilization. The farms that could be more productive with better agricultural science, the medical care that could prevent deaths that are currently inevitable, the infrastructure that could make travel safer and settlement more viable, these are not lost possibilities. They are deferred ones. The children going to school in Diamond City are accumulating the knowledge base that might eventually make some of these deferred possibilities actual. The researchers who survived in various forms across the Commonwealth are maintaining the technical knowledge that underlies them. The Minutemen's work is building the security conditions that allow the investment of time and labor in long-term projects rather than just survival. The Commonwealth is not a solved place. It won't be one in the game's time frame or, realistically, for a very long time after. But it is a place where the people who live in it are working, steadily, generation after generation, at the project of making it something better than what the bombs left behind. The ruins are the material. What they're building is still taking shape. Section 26. The last quiet finding peace at the edge of the world. There are places in the Commonwealth where the weight of everything lifts momentarily. Not because anything has been resolved, not because the factions have stopped their agendas or the ruins have rebuilt themselves or the radiation has cleared from the groundwater, but because the specific combination of a place and a moment and the quality of light conspires to produce something that feels, briefly, like peace. The hilltop above Sanctuary Hills at dusk, when the clouds to the west are catching the last of the sunlight and the settlement's lights have started to come on below, one by one, as people settle into their evening routines. The sound of the water pumps. Codsworth somewhere in the garden, still tending, still faithful, still there. The harbor at dawn, before the mirelurks surface for their morning feeding. The water flat and gray-green, the city across the channel still dark, the first birds out over the water, those mutated herons moving in the low-tide shallows with absolute patience, waiting for the thing they're waiting for. The stretch of cleared elevated highway northeast of Diamond City where, on a clear evening, you can see the whole of the city below and the harbor beyond, and the sky going amber at the edges, and the stars starting to appear in the blue above, and the city lights warming up against the coming dark, and the whole thing looking almost like a city is supposed to look, like a place where people live and the living matters. The library in the back bay, when the ferals have been cleared temporarily and it's quiet in there, the books still on their shelves, the light coming through the high windows, the dust motes moving in the shafts of late afternoon light in that particular way that dust moves when nothing else is. The specific smell of old paper, 2 centuries of it, which is not a pleasant smell precisely, but which is unmistakably the smell of accumulated knowledge, of the effort that went into putting all of this down on pages so it would persist. The moment in Far Harbor when the fog rolls back temporarily, when the pressure system changes and the condensers have been running and the wind has shifted just right, and suddenly you can see the harbor from the dock and the sea beyond it and the islands in the distance, clear, the water that particular deep blue-gray of the Maine coast in autumn, the sky wide and open above it, the world looking, for this moment, like a place where you could imagine being glad to live. These moments don't resolve anything. The next moment the fog comes back, or a radstorm rolls in, or something moves in the dark that isn't friendly. The Commonwealth is what it is, but the moments are real. They happen. And the people who live through them are changed by having experienced them, have something in their memory that the difficulty of their daily lives doesn't erase. This is what the Commonwealth offers that nothing else does. The specific beauty of a world that was nearly destroyed and kept going anyway. Not the beauty of an intact world, not the pastoral calm of an undamaged landscape. Something more particular and more hard-won. The beauty of the thing that survived, marked by everything that happened to it, carrying the evidence of its history in every scar and every ruin, and still capable of a dusk that catches the light in a way that makes you stop and look. The sole survivor stands in a place like this, and looks at it and carries whatever they're carrying, the grief of the morning that was taken, the weight of the choices made in the Commonwealth, the faces of the people they've helped and the ones they couldn't. All of it present, none of it resolved. And the sky goes dark, the stars come out, the settlement lights brighten against the dark below.